If you think you know how a broken man rises to power, think again. Stay until the end, because what Duke Lucien Ravenscar becomes will shatter everything you believe about control, betrayal, and the dangerous line between protection and obsession. Drop a like if you're ready for a story that refuses to play safe, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. England, 1819. Blackthorne province sprawled across the northern moorlands like a scar carved into the kingdom itself. The land produced more wealth than 3 royal territories combined, and at its center stood Ravenscar Keep, a fortress built from black stone that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. Duke Lucien Ravenscar stood at the iron gates watching 3 carriages disappear down the fog-choked road. Behind him, servants whispered, always whispering. He had grown accustomed to the sound, the way men grow accustomed to tinnitus, a constant ringing that signaled damage already done. The carriages belonged to Lord Pemberton, Lady Ashford, and Minister Blackwell. Lady Bacham. 3 members of Parliament, 3 supposed allies. All 3 had just informed him they could no longer support his governance. Too brutal, they said. Too uncompromising. Too dangerous. Lucien turned back toward the keep. At 32 years old, he moved like a predator grown tired of hunting prey that no longer challenged him. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair pulled back from a face that aristocratic society called handsome, in the same breath they called it terrifying. His steward, Harrison, approached with careful steps. You shouldn't have threatened Blackwell in front of the others, Harrison said quietly. Lucien continued walking. I didn't threaten him. I made a promise. There's a difference, Your Grace. Only in vocabulary. They reached the grand hall where portraits of dead Ravenscars stared down with painted eyes. Lucien's father occupied the largest frame, positioned above the fireplace like a patron saint of aristocratic ambition. Marcus Ravenscar, murdered 5 years ago during what the Crown officially called a hunting accident. Lucien knew better. His father had been investigating corruption within Parliament itself, tracing bribes that connected nobility to smuggling networks operating across northern England. The investigation had made powerful men nervous. 2 weeks before Marcus planned to present evidence to the king, he was found dead in the forest with a crossbow bolt through his heart. The official inquiry lasted 6 days, concluded with convenient uncertainty. Case closed. Since then, Lucien had rebuilt Blackthorne into something his father never managed, a territory so disciplined, so ruthlessly efficient, that even the crown hesitated before interfering. But efficiency required methods that made comfortable men uncomfortable. Last month, Lucien had publicly stripped Magistrate Thornbury of his title after discovering the man sold judicial verdicts to the highest bidder. The week before that, an entire smuggling operation vanished overnight. Not arrested. Vanished. Bodies were never found, but the message traveled across every criminal network in England. Cross Blackthorne ceased to exist. Parliament tolerated him because his methods worked. The Northern Territories generated more tax revenue than any other region. Crime rates dropped to unprecedented levels. Trade flourished under his iron governance. But tolerance is not trust, and Lucien trusted no one. Harrison cleared his throat. The council meeting is in 1 hour, Your Grace. They'll want to discuss the Pemberton alliance. There is no alliance, Lucien said. Not anymore. Then they'll want to discuss damage control. Let them discuss whatever comforts them. I have other concerns. Your sister, Harrison said carefully. Lucien stopped walking. Yes, my sister, Lady Evelyn Ravenscar, 19 years old, had collapsed 3 days ago during breakfast. No warning, no prior illness. She simply fell forward into her plate, unconscious, skin turning gray as servants screamed for help. The royal physician arrived within hours, examined her thoroughly, prescribed rest and tonics. Nothing changed. Evelyn remained unconscious, her breathing shallow, her pulse weakening by the day. A second physician was summoned from London. He declared the case beyond his expertise and recommended prayer. Lucien nearly killed him in the examination room. Harrison had intervened, pulling the Duke back before aristocratic restraint shattered completely. The physician fled Ravenscar Keep and refused to return even when offered triple his normal fee. Now Evelyn lay dying in the East Wing while Lucien systematically destroyed everyone who might be responsible. He had interrogated every servant with access to her chambers, questioned every noble guest who attended the previous week's dinner party, examined every meal, every gift, every letter she received in the month before her collapse. Nothing conclusive, only patterns, suspicious patterns. Someone inside Ravenscar Keep wanted his sister dead. The realization had transformed the fortress into a silent war zone. Servants moved through corridors with terrified efficiency. Guards watched each other as carefully as they watched visitors. Trust, already scarce, evaporated entirely. Lucien entered the council chamber where 4 men waited around an oak table scarred by decades of political negotiation. Lord Cedric Hollowmere sat at the far end, relaxed in a way that suggested either complete confidence or complete ignorance. At 45, Cedric represented old aristocratic power, the kind built on inherited wealth and parliamentary connections rather than competence. He smiled too easily, spoke too smoothly, and stood to inherit control of Blackthorne if Lucien died without producing an heir. Beside him sat Minister Grayson, whose nervous energy filled the room like smoke. He shuffled papers constantly, organizing and reorganizing documents that required no organization. Across from them, Lord Ashford picked at his fingernails with aristocratic boredom, and Minister Whitmore stared at the ceiling as though counting stones provided more value than participating in governance. "Gentlemen," Lucien said without sitting, "this will be brief." Cedric's smile widened. "We heard about Pemberton's departure. Unfortunate timing given your sister's condition." "My sister's condition is not a topic for council discussion. With respect, Your Grace, her health impacts Blackthorne's political stability. If she doesn't recover, she will recover." The certainty in Lucien's voice made Whitmore look away. Grayson shuffled papers faster. Only Cedric maintained eye contact. "Of course, but perhaps we should discuss contingency plans, succession protocols, parliamentary expectations." "There is no contingency," Lucien said quietly. "Evelyn will survive, and anyone involved in her current state will discover that death is the kindest outcome I'm capable of providing." Silence crashed through the chamber. Grayson stopped shuffling. Ashford stopped picking. Even Cedric's smile flickered. "You're suggesting assassination," Cedric said carefully. "I'm stating fact, without evidence." "Evidence," Lucien interrupted, "is something I'm currently collecting. When I find it, this council will be the second group to learn who's responsible. The first will be my interrogators." "Your Grace," Whitmore said quietly, "these accusations are dangerous. If you're wrong, I'm not wrong, then show us proof." Lucien moved around the table slowly, passing each man with predatory deliberation. "When Evelyn recovers, she will identify her poisoner. Until then, everyone inside Ravenscar Keep operates under suspicion. That includes this council." He reached the door and turned back. Meeting adjourned. The 4 men sat frozen as Lucien left the chamber. Behind him, frantic whispers erupted immediately. Let them whisper. Let them panic. Fear kept ambitious men cautious. Harrison caught up to him in the corridor. "That was unwise, Your Grace. Necessary. You've made them enemies. They were already enemies. Now they simply know I'm aware of it." They reached the east wing where Evelyn's chambers occupied 3 rooms overlooking the frozen gardens. Guards flanked every entrance. Inside, candlelight flickered across tapestries depicting pastoral scenes that mocked the violence consuming Ravenscar Keep. Evelyn lay motionless in the center of an enormous bed. Her blonde hair spread across silk pillows like spilled sunlight. Her face, normally animated with youth and intelligence, had become a wax sculpture of aristocratic beauty drained of life. Lucien sat beside her and took her cold hand. "I will find who did this," he said quietly, "and I will make them regret surviving long enough to face consequences." Evelyn's breathing remained shallow, unchanged. A knock interrupted his vigil. Harrison entered with unusual urgency. "Your Grace, there's someone here to see you. A healer. I've seen enough physicians. Not a physician, a healer. From the countryside. She claims she can save Lady Evelyn." Lucien stood slowly. "She?" "Seraphina Vale. Common-born. No aristocratic connections. But her reputation." Harrison hesitated. "People call her miracles. Patients abandoned by London's finest doctors survive under her care. She arrived an hour ago demanding an audience." "Demanding?" she said, and I quote, "Tell the Duke that if his pride matters more than his sister's life, I'll leave immediately. Otherwise, stop wasting my time." Something flickered across Lucien's face. Not quite amusement, not quite anger. Somewhere between the two. "Bring her to the examination room," he said, "now." 10 minutes later, Lucien stood in the medical chamber watching a woman who should not exist in his world. Seraphina Vale moved through the room with practiced efficiency, examining instruments, checking supplies, completely ignoring the Duke standing 5 feet away. She wore simple traveling clothes, dark wool that had seen considerable use. Her brown hair was pulled back in a practical braid. No jewelry, no cosmetics, nothing signaling deference to aristocratic expectations. She was perhaps 27, average height, slender build, unremarkable by nobility's shallow standards. Yet the way she moved suggested absolute confidence in spaces designed to make common-born people feel small. Finally, she turned to face him. "You're staring," she said. Lucien's expression remained neutral. "I'm observing. Observe faster. Your sister doesn't have time for aristocratic posturing." The sheer audacity silenced the room. Harrison looked like he might faint. The guards tensed, hands moving toward weapons. Lucien raised one hand slightly. Everyone froze. "You were summoned to examine Lady Evelyn," he said quietly. "Not critique my methods." "I was summoned to save her," Seraphina corrected. "Examining her is simply the first step. Now, are you going to let me work, or shall I return to the 20 other patients who actually want my help?" "Take me to my sister," Lucien said. They walked through corridors in tense silence. Servants pressed against walls as the Duke passed, their eyes widening at the common-born woman walking beside him without trembling. Seraphina entered Evelyn's chambers and moved directly to the bed. She checked the girl's pulse, examined her eyes, smelled her breath, studied her skin with clinical detachment. Lucien watched from the doorway. "How long have you been a healer?" 12 years. Where did you train?" "Everywhere physicians refuse to go. Plague houses, battlefield hospitals, villages too poor to afford London's finest. And you think that qualifies you to treat nobility?" Seraphina glanced at him with something approaching pity. "I think dying bodies don't care about bloodlines. Disease is remarkably democratic." She returned her attention to Evelyn. "How long has she been unconscious?" 3 days. "Any vomiting before collapse?" "No." "Seizures?" "No." "Skin discoloration?" Her fingers turned gray on the second day. Seraphina nodded slowly. She opened her leather case and removed several glass vials, holding them up to candlelight with practiced precision. Then she leaned close to Evelyn's face and examined her fingernails. When she stood, her expression had darkened. "Your sister was poisoned. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "I know," Lucien said quietly. "Then you know you have a traitor inside Ravenscar Keep." "Yes." Seraphina turned to face him fully. "And you know that whoever poisoned her will try again when she starts recovering." Lucien stepped into the room. "Can you save her?" "Yes." "How certain are you?" Seraphina's gaze never wavered. "Certain enough to stake my reputation on it, which is worth considerably more than aristocratic credentials purchased through family connections. What do you need?" 3 things. First, complete control over her treatment. No interference from physicians, ministers, or dukes with opinions about how medicine works. Granted. Second, access to your household records. Meal preparations, servant schedules, guest lists from the past month. I need to identify the poison's source. Lucien considered this. That information is confidential. Your sister is dying, Seraphina said flatly. Confidentiality is a luxury you can't afford. Granted. What's the third requirement? Seraphina stepped closer, close enough that aristocratic propriety screamed warnings that both of them ignored. When I find who poisoned her, she said quietly, you let me report them to proper authorities. No torture, no disappearances, no aristocratic revenge fantasies. Lucien's eyes darkened. You're asking me to show mercy to someone who tried to murder my sister. I'm asking you to prove you're better than the monsters you hunt. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Outside, wind howled against stone walls. Somewhere in the fortress, a door slammed shut. Finally, Lucien spoke. Save her first, then we'll discuss justice. Justice, Seraphina said, isn't negotiable. Either you agree to lawful prosecution, or I walk out that door and let your sister become another casualty of aristocratic arrogance. Harrison made a strangled sound. Even the guards looked shocked. No one threatened Duke Lucien Ravenscar. Not ministers, not nobility. Certainly not common-born healers with leather cases and dangerously steady voices. Lucien studied her with predatory intensity. You realize what you're risking? Yes. You realize I could have you removed from Blackthorne permanently? You could try, Seraphina said, but then your sister dies. And you spend the rest of your life wondering if the woman you dismissed could have saved the only family member you have left. The truth of it hit harder than any threat. Lucien had spent 5 years building walls against vulnerability, trusting no one, needing no one, converting grief into discipline and loneliness into power. Yet this common-born healer with her impossible confidence and dangerous honesty represented something he hadn't encountered since his father's death. Someone willing to challenge him. Fine, he said quietly. Lawful prosecution, after she's saved. Seraphina nodded once. Then leave. I have work to do. This is my sister's chamber, and now it's my workspace. Out. Lucien almost smiled. Almost. Instead, he turned and walked toward the door. Harrison followed, looking like he'd witnessed something historically unprecedented. At the threshold, Lucien's sides paused. Seraphina Vale. She was already mixing compounds, measuring liquids with steady hands. Yes, if my sister dies, Lucien said softly, legal prosecution will be the least of your concerns. Seraphina didn't look up. If your sister dies, it won't be from my treatment. It'll be because someone inside this fortress wants her dead badly enough to try again. So instead of threatening me, Duke Ravenscar, perhaps you should focus on finding which one of your trusted allies is actually your executioner. She was right. Lucien hated that she was right. He left the chamber and walked directly to his private study, where maps of Blackthorne covered every wall. Harrison poured wine without being asked, a routine developed over years of crisis management. What do you think? Harrison asked quietly. Lucien studied the northern territories marked with red ink indicating smuggling routes, political opposition, and unresolved threats. About the healer? Yes, she's either brilliant or dangerously overconfident. And if she's both, then she's exactly the kind of person who gets herself killed inside aristocratic warfare. Harrison sipped his wine. She didn't bow properly when entering, didn't use your title correctly, didn't show any of the deference nobility expects. Lucien nodded. I noticed. Doesn't that concern you? On the contrary, Lucien said quietly, it's the first honest interaction I've had in years. That night, Seraphina worked through darkness while Lucien paced his study like a caged predator. By dawn, Eveline's color had improved. By midday, her breathing steadied. By evening, her eyes opened for the first time in 4 days. Lucien stood in the doorway watching Seraphina administer careful doses of treatments whose compositions he didn't understand. She's asking for you, Seraphina said without turning around. Lucien approached the bed. Eveline looked at him with exhausted clarity. Lucien, she whispered. I'm here. Someone tried to kill me. I know. Do you remember who? Eveline's eyes filled with confusion and fear. The dinner party, Lord Hollomere's toast. After that, nothing. Lucien's expression turned to stone. Lord Cedric Hollowmere, his closest political ally, his designated successor. The man who sat in council meetings offering sympathy and support. The man who had just been identified as Eveline's poisoner. Rest now, Lucien said gently. You're safe. He left the chamber and found Seraphina waiting in the corridor. You heard, he said. Yes. Cedric Hollowmere orchestrated this. Seraphina crossed her arms. You have a dying girl's confused memory recovered under medical treatment. That's not evidence. That's the beginning of an investigation. It's enough. For what? Aristocratic execution based on suspicion? For questioning. Seraphina stepped closer. If you confront Hollowmere now without proof, he'll destroy the evidence and disappear. Worse, he'll claim you're unstable, using your sister's illness to eliminate political rivals. Parliament will believe him because it confirms what they already suspect about you, which is that you're one betrayal away from becoming the monster they fear you already are. The words landed like physical blows. Lucien had spent years cultivating that fear, using it as a weapon against corruption and incompetence. But Seraphina was right. The same reputation that made him untouchable also made him vulnerable to accusations of instability. What do you suggest? He asked. Patience. Investigation. Building a case that destroys him legally rather than physically. I don't have patience. Then learn, Seraphina said. Because the alternative is proving every aristocratic suspicion correct and losing Blackthorne in the process. Lucien stared at her. You understand what you're asking? I'm asking you to be smarter than your rage, which, given your reputation, should be well within your capabilities. For the second time that day, Lucien almost smiled. Instead, he nodded once. Fine. We investigate. Together? Seraphina raised one eyebrow. Together? You want evidence. I have resources. Seems logical. And what makes you think I want to work with a duke who threatens first and questions later? Because, Lucien said quietly, you're still here. Despite every reason to leave, despite every threat I've made, you're still standing in my fortress demanding I become better than what I am. That suggests either foolishness or courage. Or both, Seraphina said. Probably both. They stood in the corridor while servants pretended not to watch. Outside, night consumed Ravenscar Keep completely. Somewhere in the darkness, Cedric Hollowmere believed his assassination attempt had failed without consequences. He had no idea the storm gathering against him. What Cedric didn't know, what Parliament didn't understand, what all of aristocratic England failed to recognize, was that Duke Lucien Ravenscar had just found something more dangerous than power. He had found purpose, and standing beside him was a common-born healer who refused to fear him, refused to worship him, and absolutely refused to let him destroy himself in pursuit of revenge. Together, they would uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond one poisoned girl. Together, they would challenge every aristocratic assumption about power, bloodlines, and who deserved to rule. But first, they would have to survive each other. Because the greatest danger in Ravenscar Keep wasn't Cedric Hollowmere's ambition, or Parliament's suspicion, or even the Crown's threatened sanctions. The greatest danger was standing 3 feet apart in a torchlit corridor, both of them realizing that everything they believed about control was about to be demolished by something neither of them had prepared for. Attraction built on opposition. Respect earned through defiance. And the terrifying possibility that loving someone might require surrendering the very armor that kept them alive. The investigation began at dawn. Lucien stood in his private study surrounded by documents Harrison had compiled overnight. Servant schedules, guest registries, kitchen inventories, supply orders dating back 6 weeks. Every piece of paper represented a potential thread connecting Cedric Hollowmere to Evelyn's poisoning. But threads required weaving, and weaving required patience Lucien didn't naturally possess. Seraphina entered without knocking. She carried her leather case and a notebook filled with dense handwriting. Her eyes showed exhaustion from treating Evelyn through the night, but her movements remained sharp. Your sister's stable, she said. The poison is leaving her system, but full recovery will take weeks. Weeks we don't have, Lucien replied. If Cedric realizes Evelyn survived and might identify him, he'll either flee or strike again. Then we work faster. She moved to the desk and spread her notes beside his documents. For several minutes they worked in silence, cross-referencing information with practiced efficiency that surprised them both. Here, Seraphina said finally. 3 weeks before the dinner party, a supply order for Monk's Hood root, delivered to Ravenscar Keep's apothecary. Lucien studied the record. Monk's Hood is common in medicinal preparations. In controlled doses, yes, but concentrated extract causes exactly what happened to Evelyn: paralysis, respiratory failure, gray skin discoloration, and it's nearly impossible to detect unless you know what you're looking for. Which you did. Seraphina met his gaze. Which I did because I've treated poisoning victims before. Mostly in villages where rival families settle disputes through dinner invitations. How civilized. Humanity's oldest tradition. Murder disguised as hospitality. Lucien returned to the supply order. Who authorized this purchase? No signature, just an official seal. He examined the wax imprint more closely. Something cold settled in his chest. That's Cedric's seal. He has authorization to approve medical supplies as part of his council duties. One piece of evidence, Seraphina cautioned, not proof. It's a pattern. Patterns aren't convictions. Lucien slammed his hand on the desk hard enough to rattle inkwells. Then what exactly would constitute proof in your estimation? A signed confession? A public admission? Seraphina didn't flinch. Yes, exactly that. Because anything less gives him room to claim coincidence, clerical error, or frame someone else. You want justice? Build a case so airtight that even Parliament can't ignore it. The discipline required felt like swallowing broken glass. Every instinct screamed to drag Cedric into the dungeon, and extract truth through methods that didn't require documentation. But Seraphina was right. Revenge without strategy was just violence, and violence without purpose proved every accusation nobility whispered about him. Fine, Lucien said. We continue gathering evidence. Good. Now tell me about Cedric's relationship with your father. The question landed like a physical blow. Why does that matter? Because poisoners rarely start with murder, Seraphina said. They escalate. If Cedric poisoned Evelyn, there's a chance he's done this before. There's a chance. And the timing of your father's death was 5 years ago, Lucien interrupted sharply. 5 years after which you became Duke, and Cedric became your most trusted advisor. 5 years during which he positioned himself as your successor. 5 years of building power while everyone focused on the grieving son instead of the ambitious ally. Lucien turned away from her. My father died in a hunting accident. Officially. Officially, he repeated with dangerous emphasis. Seraphina moved closer. I read the reports Harrison provided. Crossbow bolt through the heart. No witnesses. Investigation concluded in under a week. Those aren't the hallmarks of thorough inquiry. Those are the hallmarks of deliberate concealment. You're suggesting Cedric murdered my father. I'm suggesting you ask yourself why a man skilled enough to orchestrate political poisoning would hesitate at more direct methods, especially if the target's death cleared his path to power. The study felt suddenly airless. Outside, morning light crept across Blackthorne's frozen landscape, indifferent to the conspiracies unfolding inside Ravenscar Keep. Lucien had spent 5 years believing his father's death was tragedy compounded by incompetent investigation. But what if incompetence was cover? What if the same man offering sympathy and counsel had orchestrated the murder that created the opening he now occupied? The possibility rewired everything. If you're right, Lucien said quietly, then Cedric has been playing a longer game than anyone suspected, which means confronting him prematurely doesn't just risk your sister's justice. It risks exposing a conspiracy that might reach into Parliament itself. How do we prove it? Seraphina returned to her notes. We start with what we know. Cedric ordered monkshood. Evelyn collapsed after his toast at the dinner party. Your father died under suspicious circumstances that benefited Cedric's political position. Those are facts. Now we need connections. What kind of connections? Financial records. Correspondence. Meetings between Cedric and anyone involved in your father's hunting party. And we need to identify who else might be complicit. Conspiracies, this sophisticated, don't operate in isolation. You're talking about infiltrating Cedric's personal records. I'm talking about investigation. You're the one who keeps translating it into violence. Lucien almost smiled. Almost. You're dangerously comfortable telling a duke how to conduct himself. Someone needs to be, Seraphina said. Everyone else is too terrified to tell you the truth, which is probably how Cedric operated undetected for years. Fear is useful for control, terrible for gathering intelligence. The observation cut deeper than she likely intended. Lucien had built his entire governance on fear precisely because trust had gotten his father killed. But fear also created blindness. People told him what he wanted to hear, not what he needed to know. Seraphina represented something fundamentally different. She challenged him, questioned him, refused to treat his authority as infallible. It was intoxicating and terrifying. Because the last time Lucien trusted someone completely, that person ended up dead in the forest with a crossbow bolt through his heart. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Harrison entered looking unusually agitated. Your Grace, Lord Hollowmere requests an audience. Lucien and Seraphina exchanged glances. Now? Lucien asked. He says it's urgent, concerning Lady Evelyn's recovery. Of course it is, Seraphina muttered. Show him to the receiving chamber, Lucien said, and have guards positioned outside, discreetly. Harrison nodded and disappeared. This could be reconnaissance, Seraphina said. He wants to assess whether Evelyn remembers anything incriminating. Then we give him nothing. Can you manage that? Not threatening him the moment he walks in? Lucien adjusted his coat with deliberate precision. I'm capable of restraint when strategy demands it. I'll believe that when I see it. They walked through corridors thick with morning cold. Servants pressed against walls as they passed. Word had spread through the household that something significant was unfolding. The Duke and the common-born healer working together. Closed-door meetings. Armed guards appearing in unusual locations. Ravenscar Keep held its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. The receiving chamber was a calculated space designed to make visitors feel simultaneously welcomed and dominated. High ceilings, expensive art, furniture arranged to give the Duke strategic advantage. Cedric waited near the fireplace, relaxed confidence radiating from every gesture. He smiled when Lucien entered. "Your Grace, I came as soon as I heard the good news about Lady Eveline's recovery." "News travels quickly," Lucien observed. "In matters concerning your family, I make it my business to stay informed. We're all relieved she's improving." "We?" "Your council, your household, anyone who cares about Blackthorne's stability." Lucien sat in the high-backed chair, positioned to catch firelight favorably. Seraphina remained standing near the window, a positioning that made Cedric's eyes flicker with confusion. "And Miss Vale," Cedric said with carefully measured courtesy, "your reputation precedes you. Quite remarkable what you've accomplished." "I saved a dying girl," Seraphina replied flatly. "Hardly remarkable, just competent medicine." "Still, where others failed, you succeeded. That suggests exceptional skill, or it suggests previous physicians were incompetent, which raises questions about why they failed to identify obvious poisoning." The temperature in the room dropped perceptibly. Cedric's smile remained fixed. "Poisoning? I hadn't heard that diagnosis." "Because it wasn't shared publicly," Lucien said. "For strategic reasons." "Of course," Cedric agreed smoothly. "Though I must say, the accusation is deeply troubling. Do we know who might have done such a thing?" "Not yet. But investigations are thorough. I'm certain they are. And I trust you'll inform the council when arrests are made. You'll be among the first to know." "Excellent." Cedric moved toward the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. I've been reviewing succession protocols given recent events. Just precautionary measures, you understand. Should anything happen to Lady Eveline before she marries and produces heirs, the Blackthorne title would transfer to the nearest male relative with parliamentary approval." "Which would be you," Lucien said. Cedric spread his hands apologetically. "An uncomfortable reality of aristocratic law. Though obviously we all pray such circumstances never materialize." "Obviously. I simply wanted to ensure you're aware of the legal frameworks. These things can become complicated during emotional crises." Seraphina spoke from the window. "How thoughtful of you to clarify inheritance law while the Duke's sister is still recovering from attempted murder. Really demonstrates where your priorities lie." Cedric's expression flickered. "Mere pragmatism, Miss Vale. Leadership requires considering scenarios others find distasteful." "Is that what you call it? Pragmatism? What would you call it?" Seraphina smiled without warmth, transparent ambition poorly disguised as concern. The silence that followed felt razor-sharp. Cedric looked to Lucien, clearly expecting aristocratic solidarity against common-born insolence. Instead, Lucien remained perfectly still, his expression revealing nothing. "Well," Cedric said carefully, "I can see you're busy. I'll take my leave. Do send word when the investigation produces results." "Count on it," Lucien replied. After Cedric left, Seraphina turned to Lucien. "He's terrified." "You think?" "Completely." That entire performance was reconnaissance disguised as sympathy. He wanted to know what Eveline remembers, how much you suspect, and whether his position is secure. And what did we tell him? Nothing certain, everything threatening. Seraphina moved away from the window, which means he'll accelerate whatever plans he has, either securing evidence or destroying it, or removing witnesses. The implication hung heavy between them. Lucien stood and paced the chamber. "We need to move faster. Get inside his personal chambers. Find correspondence, financial records, anything connecting him to the poisoning or my father's death. Breaking into a council member's quarters is treason," Seraphina pointed out. "Only if we're caught. And if we are, then I'll claim ducal authority, and you'll claim you were following my orders." "How noble. Throwing the common-born healer under aristocratic wheels." Lucien stopped pacing. "I wouldn't let that happen." "Why not?" "I'm disposable by your society's standards." "You're not disposable to me." The words emerged before he could stop them. Raw, unguarded, completely contrary to every lesson about emotional discipline drilled into him since childhood. Seraphina stared at him. Lucien stared back. Outside, wind-rattled windows. Somewhere in the fortress, doors opened and closed with hollow echoes. "What are we doing?" Seraphina asked quietly. The question carried weight beyond investigation tactics. Lucien moved closer, stopping just inside the boundary where propriety became something else. "I'm trying to find justice for my sister while preventing my closest advisor from committing additional murders." "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to keep you from destroying yourself in the process." "Why?" "Because someone has to. And everyone else is too afraid or too complicit to try." "That's not an answer." Seraphina held his gaze. "Yes, it is. You just don't like what it implies." "Which is?" "That maybe I see something in you worth saving, something beyond the terrifying Duke everyone else fears. Something human. Humanity is vulnerability," Lucien said. "And vulnerability gets people killed, only if you let it. Otherwise, it's just honesty." The space between them felt electrically charged. Lucien had spent 5 years building walls against exactly this. Connection, trust, the dangerous illusion that someone might understand him beyond strategic value. Yet Seraphina dismantled those walls through sheer refusal to accept them as permanent. "Tonight," Lucien said finally, "we search Cedric's chambers after the household sleeps. I'll need access to your servant passages. Harrison can provide maps. And if we find nothing, then we expand the investigation. But we will find something. Men this ambitious always leave evidence." Seraphina nodded. "Then I should return to Evelyn. She needs continuous monitoring for the next 48 hours. Lucien watched her gather her materials. Before she reached the door, he spoke again. "Seraphina." She turned. "Thank you. For what you said about seeing something worth saving." She smiled slightly. "Don't thank me yet. You might not like what I'm trying to save you from, which is yourself." That night, Ravenscar Keep descended into uneasy quiet. Servants finished their duties and retreated to quarters. Guards changed shifts with military precision. Candles were extinguished throughout the fortress until only essential lights remained burning. Lucien met Seraphina in the servant corridor behind the east wing. She wore dark clothing and carried a small lantern shuttered to minimal visibility. "Harrison provided these," she said, handing Lucien a set of keys. "Access to Cedric's chambers and his private study." How did Harrison acquire keys to a council member's quarters? Apparently being steward for 30 years comes with certain advantages. They moved through passages designed for servants to navigate the fortress unseen. The architecture of aristocratic invisibility. Spaces where common-born workers conducted the labor that maintained noble comfort while remaining perpetually out of sight. Seraphina navigated them with surprising familiarity. "You've done this before," Lucien observed. "Searched aristocratic estates for evidence?" "No, but I've spent years moving through spaces where I wasn't supposed to exist. Same principle." They reached a concealed door opening into the west wing where council members maintained private chambers. Lucien used Harrison's keys to unlock the entrance. Cedric's quarters occupied 3 rooms reflecting old aristocratic wealth, expensive furniture, imported carpets, shelves lined with leather-bound books arranged more for appearance than reading. Lucien headed directly for the study while Seraphina examined the main chamber. For 20 minutes, they worked in near silence. Lucien searched desks and cabinets with methodical precision. Every drawer, every hidden compartment, every space where documents might be concealed. Nothing too clean, too organized, too deliberate. "Here," Seraphina called softly. Lucien joined her near the fireplace where she knelt examining the hearth. "Burn marks," she said, "recent. And look at this." She retrieved partially burned paper fragments from beneath the grate. The fire had been hastily extinguished, leaving enough evidence to reconstruct portions of text. Lucien held the fragments to lantern light. Partial words emerged. Names, dates, references to meetings. And one phrase repeated across multiple fragments. "Succession contingency." "He's been planning this for months," Seraphina said. "Maybe years." Lucien carefully collected the fragments. "This proves intent, but not action. We need more. There's something else." She moved to Cedric's desk and pointed to scratches around the lock. "Someone forced this recently. Someone other than Cedric." "How can you tell?" "The scratches are on the outside. If Cedric forced his own lock, marks would be different. Someone broke in looking for something, or planting something." Seraphina met his eyes. "You think we're not the only ones investigating him?" "I think conspiracies have a tendency to consume their participants. If Cedric betrayed my father, he's likely betrayed others. And betrayed people become dangerous. They continued searching until Lucien found a hidden compartment beneath the desk's false bottom. Inside lay a single letter sealed with wax they both recognized. Parliamentary seal, Seraphina whispered. Lucien broke it open. The correspondence was dated 3 weeks before Evelyn's poisoning, written in formal language describing Cedric's growing concerns about ducal stability in Blackthorne, subtle implications about Lucien's aggressive governance creating political instability, and a final paragraph that stopped his breath. Should current leadership continue demonstrating erratic judgment, alternative succession arrangements must be considered for the province's stability and the Crown's interests. It was signed by 3 parliamentary ministers. They're positioning to remove you, Seraphina said. Worse, they're positioning to justify it legally. If Evelyn had died, Parliament would have approved Cedric as emergency successor, claiming ducal incompetence endangered the province. And your father's investigation into parliamentary corruption would be permanently buried. Lucien stared at the letter. Everything connected. His father threatening to expose bribery networks. Convenient hunting accident. 5 years of Cedric consolidating power. Evelyn's poisoning time to create succession crisis. It wasn't just murder. It was systematic overthrow disguised as legal protocol. We need to leave, Seraphina said. Now, before... The door opened. Cedric stood in the entrance flanked by 2 guards. His expression showed no surprise, only cold satisfaction. Your Grace, he said calmly, I had wondered when you'd resort to criminal trespass. Lucien pocketed the letter with deliberate slowness. You orchestrated my father's murder. A serious accusation. Do you have proof? Lucien held up the burned fragments and the parliamentary correspondence. Enough to start asking very uncomfortable questions. Cedric smiled. You broke into my private chambers and stole confidential documents. Any evidence you claim to possess is legally inadmissible and personally compromising. The trap closed with perfect precision. If Lucien used the evidence, he admitted to illegal search. If he didn't, Cedric remained protected by legal technicality and political connections. Seraphina stepped forward. Unless someone else discovered the evidence and reported it through proper channels. Cedric's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting what exactly, Miss Vale? That you underestimated how many people in Ravenscar Keep might want you exposed. Servants, guards, staff you've treated as invisible for years. People who notice things. People who talk. Cedric gestured to his guards. Arrest them both. The guards hesitated, not with enthusiasm or agreement, but with genuine confusion about whose authority superseded whose in this particular aristocratic nightmare. Lucien used the hesitation. These men serve Blackthorne, not council members engaging in treason. Lower your weapons or face consequences that extend beyond tonight. The guards looked between Duke and council member, power dynamics shifting in real time. Finally, both stepped back. Cedric's composure cracked. You're making a catastrophic mistake. No, Lucien said. You made the mistake 5 years ago when you murdered my father. Tonight is simply reckoning. Without proof, could go shat de. I have Lady Evelyn's testimony identifying you as her poisoner. I have supply records showing your authorization for monkshood purchase. I have burned correspondence proving you've been coordinating with Parliament to orchestrate my removal. And I have 5 years of suspicion that's about to become very thorough investigation. Cedric's face transformed. Charm evaporated. Beneath it lived something calculating and vicious. You self-righteous fool, he said quietly. Your father was destroying England's economic stability with his moral crusading. The bribery networks he wanted exposed were keeping trade flowing and preventing French influence from destabilizing our borders. He had to be stopped. So you killed him. We eliminated a threat to national security. We, Lucien repeated. Who else? Cedric smiled with genuine malice. You'll never prove it. The men involved are too powerful. The system's too entrenched. You might suspect. You might rage. But you'll never convict anyone who matters. Watch me. Lucien turned to the guards. Escort Lord Hollowmere to the dungeon. Charge him with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of Lady Evelyn Ravenscar, and treason against the Duchy of Blackthorne. The guards moved forward. Cedric backed against the wall. This is illegal detention without parliamentary approval. This is ducal authority exercised within my territory. If Parliament objects, they can send formal protest. Until then, You're confined pending trial. As guards seized Cedric's arms, he locked eyes with Lucien. You think this ends with me? You think exposing one conspiracy destroys the network? Lucien stepped closer. No, but it starts the process. Cedric laughed, bitter and desperate. You just declared war on institutions that have existed for centuries. They'll crush you. They can try. As Cedric was dragged from the chambers, Seraphina moved beside Lucien. We need to move fast. Once Parliament learns you've imprisoned a council member, they'll retaliate. Let them come. Lucien, I'm done accommodating men who murder with impunity because their positions make them untouchable. My father tried working within the system. It got him killed. Maybe it's time someone burned the system down instead. Seraphina grabbed his arm. That's exactly what they want you to do. Overreach. Become the tyrant they've been claiming you are. Give them justification to remove you by force. Then what would you have me do? Release Cedric? Pretend this didn't happen? Build the case properly. Make it so airtight that Parliament can't ignore it without exposing their own corruption. Turn their own legal mechanisms against them. That takes time we don't have. Then we make time, Seraphina insisted, because the alternative is validating every accusation they've made about you being too dangerous to rule. Lucien pulled away from her. You keep asking me to be patient, restrained, civilized. But these men murdered my father and tried to murder my sister. Forgive me if legal protocols feel insufficient. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking for strategy. Strategy is what got us here. My father had strategy. He had evidence. He followed every legal pathway. And he ended up dead in the forest while the men responsible walked free. The words echoed through empty chambers. Seraphina's expression softened. I know you're angry. I know you want immediate justice. But if you act like the monster they claim you are, you lose everything your father died trying to protect. Maybe what he was trying to protect isn't worth saving. You don't mean that, don't I? Look at this system. Corruption protected by tradition, murder excused by political necessity. Common people crushed beneath aristocratic indifference. My father believed in reforming it. Where did that belief get him? It got him a son willing to continue the fight. Lucien stared at her. What? Your father fought corruption despite knowing the risks. He gathered evidence knowing powerful men wanted him dead. He tried changing England from within, even though the system was designed to prevent exactly that change. And he raised a son capable of finishing what he started. Seraphina stepped closer. You think becoming a tyrant honors his memory? You think burning everything down proves his sacrifice meant something? It doesn't. It just proves fear is stronger than hope. And I don't believe that's true. Why not? Because you're still here having this conversation instead of executing Cedric without trial. Because you searched for evidence instead of acting on suspicion. Because, despite every reason to become the monster England fears, you keep choosing something harder. Which is, being better than the men who destroyed your family. The words landed like absolution and accusation simultaneously. Lucien had spent 5 years believing power was the only shield against loss. That dominance prevented vulnerability. That fear created safety. But Seraphina was asking him to consider something far more dangerous. That maybe strength wasn't domination. Maybe it was restraint. Maybe the hardest battle wasn't conquering enemies, but conquering the darkness those enemies created inside him. Fine, he said finally, we build the case. Properly. Legally. But if Parliament interferes or Cedric's allies attempt rescue, all restraint ends. Agreed. They left Cedric's chambers and returned through servant passages toward the main fortress. Dawn approached, turning windows from black to gray. As they walked, Seraphina spoke quietly. What happens after the trial? If we win, Cedric hangs and his co-conspirators face prosecution. And if we lose, then England learns whether one duke with evidence can challenge an entire corrupted system. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. They emerged into the grand hall where portraits of dead Ravenscars watched with painted indifference. Lucien's father stared down from above the fireplace, frozen in aristocratic dignity. For the first time in 5 years, Lucien looked at that portrait without feeling only grief. Now he felt purpose. I'm going to finish what you started, he said silently, even if it destroys me in the process. Beside him, Seraphina touched his arm gently. You're not alone in this. Lucien covered her hand with his. I know. What he didn't say was that her presence terrified him more than any conspiracy, because caring about someone created vulnerability, and vulnerability gave enemies leverage. But maybe, just maybe, vulnerability also created strength impossible to achieve alone. The thought followed him through corridors as Ravenscar Keep woke to news that would shatter England's aristocratic certainty. Lord Cedric Hollowmere, trusted council member and designated successor, had been arrested for treason and murder. The trial would begin in 7 days, and standing beside the feared Duke of Blackthorne was a common-born healer who had somehow convinced him that justice mattered more than revenge. Together, they would face Parliament's wrath, aristocratic resistance, and assassination attempts from conspirators desperate to protect their positions. Together, they would challenge every assumption about power, bloodlines, and who deserved to rule England. But first, they would have to survive the realization that fighting corruption from within meant becoming targets themselves. Because the moment Lucien chose prosecution over execution, he crossed a line that made retreat impossible. He declared war on the very system that gave him power. And wars, even righteous ones, always demand terrible prices from those brave enough or foolish enough to fight them. 7 days passed like a held breath before drowning. Ravenscar Keep transformed into a fortress preparing for siege. Armed guards tripled along every corridor. Servants moved with terrified efficiency, speaking only when necessary. Every meal Lucien ate was tested by official tasters. Every letter entering the estate underwent inspection. Every visitor faced interrogation before gaining entry. Parliament's response arrived on the 3rd day. A formal demand for Cedric's immediate release pending proper investigation by Crown-appointed magistrates, signed by 15 ministers, delivered with barely concealed threat. Lucien burned it in the Grand Hall fireplace while Harrison watched with mounting anxiety. "You're backing them into a corner," Harrison warned. "Powerful men don't respond well to public humiliation." "Then they shouldn't have murdered my father," Lucien replied. The trial preparations consumed every waking hour. Seraphina worked alongside Lucien compiling evidence, organizing testimonies, constructing a case designed to survive aristocratic scrutiny. The burned correspondence, supply records, Evelyn's recovering memory, witness statements from servants who noticed suspicious meetings between Cedric and unknown visitors. But evidence meant nothing without presentation. And presentation required navigating legal frameworks designed to protect nobility from accountability. Lucien hired 3 lawyers from London. All 3 declined after learning the defendant's identity. The 4th accepted, then disappeared 2 days later. No note, no explanation. Simply vanished as though reality had erased him. Fear worked better than bribery when protecting conspiracies. On the 5th day, Evelyn was strong enough to provide formal testimony. She sat in her chambers with Lucien, Seraphina, and a court recorder, recounting the dinner party with painful precision. "Lord Hollowmere proposed a toast to family loyalty," she said quietly. Everyone drank. But I remember his expression when he watched me, like he was waiting for something. "What happened after the toast?" the recorder asked. I felt strange, dizzy. My fingers went numb. I tried to stand and couldn't. Then everything went dark. "Did Lord Hollowmere do anything unusual during this time?" Evelyn's hands trembled. He smiled. While I was collapsing, while servants were screaming, he just smiled. Lucien's jaw tightened. Seraphina placed a hand on his arm in silent warning. The recorder finished documenting Evelyn's statement and left. Silence filled the chamber until Evelyn spoke again. "He's going to escape this, isn't he?" Evelyn said. "Men like Cedric always do." "Not this time," Lucien promised. "How can you be certain?" "Because I'm willing to burn down England's entire aristocratic structure to ensure justice. That's not rhetoric, it's commitment." Seraphina waited until they left Evelyn's chambers before pulling Lucien aside. "You need to stop making promises you might not be able to keep. I don't make promises I can't keep. You just told your sister that justice is guaranteed, but we both know this trial could collapse in dozens of ways. Witness intimidation, judicial corruption, parliamentary intervention. You're setting her up for devastating disappointment. Then I'll make certain none of those things happen." Seraphina grabbed his arm hard enough to stop him walking. "Listen to yourself. You sound like a man preparing to commit atrocities in justice's name. That's not righteousness. That's revenge disguised as principle. What's the difference when the system itself is corrupt? The difference is whether you become what you're fighting against." Lucien pulled away from her. "I'm trying to save what my father died for. If that requires methods that make comfortable people uncomfortable, so be it. And when those methods turn you into another tyrant, then at least I'll be a tyrant who punishes murderers instead of protecting them. He left her standing in the corridor and retreated to his study, where maps and documents created an empire of evidence. But evidence was just paper. Power was action. And action required decisions that legal frameworks couldn't contain. That night, Harrison brought news that shattered everything. "Your Grace," Harrison said, entering without knocking, "we have a problem." Lucien looked up from correspondence he was drafting to parliamentary allies. "Define problem." "Lord Ashford is dead. Found in his estate 3 hours ago. Single crossbow bolt through the heart. The room tilted. Ashford, council member. One of the 4 men who sat through meetings while Cedric orchestrated conspiracy. A potential witness. A crucial link in proving broader aristocratic involvement. Dead. Same method that killed Lucien's father." "How?" Lucien demanded. "No witnesses. Estate guards claim they heard nothing. Body discovered by servants during evening rounds." Lucien stood slowly. "This wasn't coincidence." "No, Your Grace. It was message." "From who?" Harrison's expression was grim. "Whoever wants this investigation buried." Seraphina entered moments later, having heard the news through household channels that moved information faster than official reports. She found Lucien standing at the window staring into darkness. "They're eliminating witnesses," she said. "Yes, which means we're running out of time. If Cedric's allies can murder council members inside their own estates, they can reach anyone." Lucien turned to face her. "Then we accelerate the trial. Tomorrow instead of 2 days from now." "You can't. The Crown's magistrates haven't arrived yet. Conducting trial without them gives Parliament grounds to declare the entire proceeding illegal." "I don't care about grounds." "You should. Because illegal trial means any conviction gets overturned and you face charges for judicial overreach." "Then what do you suggest?" "Wait while they murder everyone who might testify against them." Seraphina moved closer. "I suggest we stop reacting and start anticipating. They killed Ashford to frighten us, to make us rush, to force mistakes. Don't give them what they want. What I want is justice. What you want is revenge, and they're counting on that. They want you to overreact, to bypass legal protocols, to prove you're the dangerous tyrant they've been claiming." The accuracy of it felt like physical assault. Lucien had spent days constructing legal cases and gathering evidence specifically to avoid becoming the monster aristocratic England feared. But every murdered witness, every parliamentary threat, every delay tactic pushed him closer to abandoning restraint entirely. And somewhere, Cedric's allies were watching. Waiting. Calculating exactly how much pressure would break the Duke of Blackthorne's civilized facade. "Fine," Lucien said. "We wait for the magistrates. But security increases immediately. No one enters or leaves Ravenscar Keep without personal authorization. Guards are doubled on Cedric's cell. And you don't leave this fortress under any circumstances." "Me, specifically? You're the only person I trust completely, which makes you the most valuable target." Seraphina studied him with an expression somewhere between concern and something far more complicated. "You realize what you just said? That I trust you?" "Yes." "Is that problematic? In your world?" "Absolutely. Trust is weakness. Everyone knows that." "Then everyone is wrong." The words hung between them like confession. Seraphina stepped closer until propriety became irrelevant. "When did you decide to trust me?" "When you refused to fear me," Lucien said quietly. "When you challenged every assumption I made about power and governance. When you made me question whether domination is actually strength or just fear wearing authority's mask. That's not trust. That's attraction. Can it be both?" The question shifted everything. They stood in the study surrounded by evidence of conspiracy and aristocratic corruption, while something entirely different charged the air between them. Something that had been building since Seraphina first walked into Ravenscar Keep, refusing to bow properly. Something dangerous. Because falling for someone meant vulnerability, and vulnerability created leverage for enemies to exploit. Before either could speak again, glass shattered. The window exploded inward. Crossbow bolt embedded itself in the wall 3 inches from Lucien's head. Shouts erupted from the courtyard below. Lucien shoved Seraphina to the floor and drew the blade he kept perpetually within reach. Guards burst through the door seconds later, weapons ready. "Secure the courtyard," Lucien ordered. "Find whoever fired that shot." The guards scattered. Harrison appeared looking stricken. "Your Grace, are you injured?" "No." But someone just attempted assassination inside my own fortress. They found the crossbow abandoned on the outer wall. Professional equipment, military grade, no identifying marks. The shooter had disappeared into darkness before guards could respond. Message received with perfect clarity. Cedric's allies could reach Lucien anywhere, even inside Ravenscar Keep's supposedly impenetrable security. The night became chaos. Guards swept every corridor. Servants were confined to quarters. The entire fortress locked down under martial protocols. Lucien stood in the grand hall watching organized panic unfold around him. Seraphina remained at his side despite his orders that she retreat to secured chambers. "This is escalating too quickly," she said. "Yes, they're not just protecting Cedric anymore. They're trying to kill you before trial even begins. Also, yes. Then we need to change strategies. Waiting for magistrates means giving them time for more assassination attempts." "What do you suggest?" Seraphina turned to face him fully. "Use me as bait." "Absolutely not. Listen, they want to eliminate threats to their conspiracy. I'm treating the primary witness and helping build the prosecution. That makes me a target, so let's use that. By putting you in danger? No. The danger exists regardless," Seraphina insisted. "At least this way we control the circumstances. Set a trap. Let them come for me. Catch them in the act. And if something goes wrong, then you'll do what you always do. Respond with overwhelming force." Lucien grabbed her shoulders. "I will not risk your life. You risk yours constantly." "That's different. Why?" "Because you're a duke, and I'm common-born. Because your life matters more. Because losing you would destroy me in ways losing myself wouldn't." The confession emerged raw and unguarded. Seraphina's expression softened. "Lucien, this isn't about hierarchy or value. It's about ending this before more people die. Ashford is already dead. How many more will they murder while we wait for proper procedures?" She was right, and he hated that she was right. Every instinct screamed to lock her in the most secure chamber and post guards who'd die before letting anyone approach. But instinct wasn't strategy, and strategy required sacrifices that safe choices couldn't achieve. "If we do this," Lucien said carefully, "it happens under conditions I dictate. Guards positioned throughout, escape routes secured, and the moment anything seems wrong, the operation ends." Agreed. They spent the next day constructing an elaborate trap. Seraphina would continue treating Evelyn in the East Wing as normal, but guards would be repositioned to create apparent vulnerabilities. Routes would seem accessible that actually led to ambush points, and Lucien would wait in concealment, ready to respond the moment threats materialized. It was dangerous, reckless, exactly the kind of plan desperate people attempted when conventional approaches failed. Night fell across Ravenscar Keep with oppressive weight. Seraphina moved through her normal routines while invisible guards watched from predetermined positions. Every sound became potential threat. Every shadow might conceal assassins. Hours passed. Nothing happened. Midnight approached. Still nothing. Then movement, fast and professional. 3 figures in dark clothing emerged from the servant passages Lucien had deliberately left monitored but accessible. They moved toward Evelyn's chambers with practiced stealth. Lucien signaled guards into position. The trap was closing. The assassins reached the outer chamber, picked the lock with professional efficiency, entered with weapons drawn. Guards emerged from concealment. Blades flashed in candlelight, but something was wrong. The assassins didn't fight. They surrendered immediately. Too immediately, like men expecting capture. Lucien's instincts screamed warning. This wasn't the real attack, it was distraction. He turned and ran towards Seraphina's actual location, the medical workroom where she'd been organizing supplies. The place he'd stationed fewer guards because the trap was supposed to draw threats elsewhere. He burst through the door and found Nightmare, Seraphina on the floor, bleeding from a head wound. Standing over her was Minister Grayson, the nervous council member who shuffled papers constantly, who seemed too anxious to be dangerous, who held a blade to Seraphina's throat. Grayson's expression showed no nervousness now, only cold calculation. "Your Grace," Grayson said calmly. "How convenient. Saves me the trouble of hunting you down separately." Lucien froze 3 steps inside the room. His blade was drawn but useless. Any move toward Grayson meant Seraphina's death. "Let her go," Lucien said quietly. "So you can arrest me like Cedric?" "I think not. You were part of it. The conspiracy. My father's murder." "Obviously. though I must admit you've proven more resilient than anticipated. Most sons would have accepted the hunting accident story and moved on. Your persistence has been genuinely inconvenient. Why? Why what? Why kill your father? Why poison your sister? Why risk everything to stop your investigation? All of it. Grayson smiled. Because your father was about to expose corruption that keeps England functioning. The bribery networks he wanted destroyed. They fund naval defense against French aggression. The smuggling operations he wanted eliminated. They move intelligence faster than official channels. Your father's morality would have crippled England's security. So you murdered him. We eliminated a threat. Same as we're eliminating you now. Lucien took one careful step forward. You won't leave this fortress alive. I don't need to. Killing you and the healer accomplishes the objective. Cedric gets released for lack of witnesses. Investigation collapses. And England remains secure under people who understand that power requires getting hands dirty. Seraphina stirred slightly. Blood ran down her face from where Grayson had struck her. Lucien's control fractured. 5 years of discipline. 5 years of choosing legal prosecution over violence. 5 years of becoming better than the monsters who destroyed his family. All of it evaporated watching Seraphina bleeding on the floor. Grayson saw the transformation. Good, he said. Show me the beast everyone fears. Prove you're exactly what we claimed. Lucien moved, not toward Grayson, toward the oil lamp on the workbench. He grabbed it and threw it at the wall. Fire erupted across chemical supplies Seraphina kept for treatments. Flames spread with terrifying speed. Grayson's eyes widened. You'll kill us all, only you. Smoke filled the room. Grayson stumbled backward away from spreading fire. His blade lowered just slightly from Seraphina's throat. Lucien attacked. He crossed the distance faster than Grayson could react, slammed into him with full force. They crashed into burning shelves. Grayson's blade clattered away. Lucien's fist connected with Grayson's face. Once, twice, again and again, until aristocratic composure shattered into screaming. Guards burst through the door. Someone grabbed Lucien and pulled him back before he beat Grayson to death. The fire was spreading. Smoke choked the air. Get them out! Harrison shouted. Guards dragged Lucien and the unconscious Seraphina from the burning chamber. Others pulled the barely conscious Grayson toward safety. They emerged into corridors filling with smoke and panic. Servants ran with buckets. Guards organized water lines. The entire wing became organized chaos fighting flames. Lucien carried Seraphina to her own medical chambers and laid her on the examination table. Her head wound bled freely but didn't appear fatal. He pressed clean cloth against it with shaking hands. She woke slowly, focused on him with difficulty. Did we catch them? She whispered. Yes. 3 assassins. And Grayson. Grayson? The minister? He was the one who attacked you. He confessed everything. My father's murder, the conspiracy, all of it. Seraphina touched his face gently. You're covered in blood. Most of it isn't mine. That's not reassuring. I know. She sat up slowly despite his protests. What happened in that room? Lucien looked away. I lost control. Exactly what you warned me against. You saved my life. By becoming the monster they claimed I was. Seraphina grabbed his face and forced him to meet her eyes. You became the man willing to do anything to protect someone you care about. That's not monstrous. That's human. The distinction felt meaningless. Lucien had spent the entire investigation choosing legal prosecution over violence, building cases instead of bodies, proving he was better than the men who murdered his father. Then Seraphina bled on the floor and every civilized choice evaporated. What does that say about me? He asked quietly. That you're capable of terrible things when people you love are threatened. Welcome to humanity. Is that supposed to be comforting? No, just honest. They sat in silence while the fortress fought fires and secured prisoners. Outside the chamber, organized chaos slowly transformed into controlled emergency response. Harrison appeared in the doorway. Your Grace, Minister Grayson is secured. The 3 assassins are in custody, and I'm afraid there's more news. What now? The Crown's magistrates arrived an hour ago. They're demanding immediate audience. Of course they are. Lucien muttered. He stood and prepared to face whatever fresh catastrophe England's legal system had prepared for him. But before leaving, he turned back to Seraphina. Thank you, he said. For what? For making me believe justice was possible, even if I failed to maintain that belief when it mattered most. Seraphina smiled despite her injuries. You didn't fail. You're just learning that justice and protection sometimes require the same violence you're trying to rise above. The difference is in the why. That's a thin distinction. Most important ones are. The Crown's magistrates waited in the Grand Hall with expressions suggesting they'd already reached conclusions before hearing evidence. 3 men in official robes. Representatives of royal authority. Defenders of aristocratic privilege. Your Grace, the lead magistrate said coldly. We arrived to conduct proper investigation into Lord Hollomere's detention. Instead, we find attempted assassinations, burning chambers, and prisoners claiming torture. Grayson confessed, Lucien said, after you beat him nearly to death according to witnesses. After he attacked an innocent healer and admitted orchestrating my father's murder. The magistrate's expression didn't change. We'll review all evidence and testimony. Until then, Lord Hollomere and Minister Grayson are transferred to Crown custody pending proper trial in London. The words fell like execution sentence. London trials meant aristocratic juries, parliamentary influence, legal frameworks designed to protect nobility from accountability regardless of evidence. Everything Lucien had fought for was about to be stolen by the same corrupted system that murdered his father. No, he said quietly. The magistrate raised an eyebrow. Your Grace? No. They remain in Blackthorne custody. Trial proceeds here as planned. That's not your decision. It absolutely is. This is my territory, my jurisdiction, my investigation, which you've conducted through illegal detention, unauthorized interrogation, and according to multiple witnesses, actual torture. The Crown is assuming authority. Lucien stepped forward. The Crown didn't care when my father was murdered, didn't investigate when evidence pointed to conspiracy, didn't act when corruption consumed Parliament. So forgive me if I don't trust Crown authority now. The magistrate's voice hardened. You're very close to treason, Duke Ravenscar. I'm very close to justice. If that's treason in England, then maybe England needs to burn. The declaration silenced the chamber. Harrison looked stricken. The magistrates exchanged glances. Even the guards seemed uncertain whether they should be arresting their duke or defending him. Lucien had crossed every line, challenged Crown authority, threatened national institutions, admitted willingness to commit acts that could only be defined as rebellion. And he didn't care, because he'd spent 5 years watching the system protect murderers while claiming moral authority. 5 years seeing corruption disguised as tradition. 5 years believing legal frameworks mattered more than justice itself. Seraphina had been right from the beginning. The system was broken, and working within it meant accepting that brokenness as permanent. Maybe it was time to break it completely. The magistrate drew himself up formally. Duke Lucien Ravenscar, by authority of the Crown, I hereby order your immediate cooperation in transferring prisoners and ceasing unauthorized investigation. Lucien's answer was delivered with terrifying calm. No. Then you leave us no choice. You are hereby stripped of judicial authority pending Crown review of your governance. Lucien smiled without humor. You're welcome to try enforcing that. This is your final warning, and this is mine. Leave Ravenscar Keep before I decide Crown magistrates are as complicit in conspiracy as the men they're trying to protect. The magistrates stared at him. At the Duke, who had just declared open defiance of royal authority, who stood willing to fight Crown forces to maintain control of prisoners and investigation, who had become exactly what they feared. The lead magistrate turned sharply. We're leaving. But understand this, Your Grace. You've just made yourself enemy of the Crown. There's no recovering from that position. Then I'll die an enemy, Lucien said. But I'll die knowing I fought for justice instead of protecting murderers. The magistrates departed with theatrical outrage. Their carriages vanished into darkness, carrying threats of royal sanctions, military intervention, and formal charges of treason. Harrison approached slowly. Your Grace, what have you done? What I should have done 5 years ago. You've declared war on England. I've declared war on corruption. If England stands with corruption, then yes, war it is. Seraphina appeared from the medical wing, bandaged but mobile. She'd heard everything. So this is it, she said quietly. The point where legal prosecution becomes armed rebellion. Lucien met her eyes. I'm sorry. I know you wanted justice through proper channels. I wanted you to survive this, but survival and righteousness aren't always compatible. Are you saying I'm wrong? I'm saying you've made a choice that can't be unmade, and now we face consequences together. We? Seraphina smiled slightly. You think I'm abandoning you after everything? I've invested too much work keeping you alive to quit now. This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I chose to help you. Besides, someone needs to document when the Duke of Blackthorne finally transforms from feared ruler into full revolutionary. Might as well be the common-born healer who started this entire chain of events. Lucien almost laughed. Revolution, is that what we're calling it? What would you call it? Survival, justice. Refusing to let murderers win because they have better political connections. That's the idealistic version, Seraphina said. The realistic version is you just made yourself target for every force England can bring against Blackthorne. Military, political, economic. They'll crush you. Let them try. The defiance would have sounded more convincing if Lucien didn't recognize the truth beneath it. He'd just declared war on institutions centuries old, challenged royal authority, made himself enemy of the crown, and he'd done it not through careful strategy but through raw refusal to surrender prisoners to corrupted legal systems. Everything his father tried to change through patient evidence gathering and legal frameworks, Lucien had just attempted through open rebellion, and rebellion, historically, ended with executions. But standing in the grand hall, surrounded by portraits of dead Ravenscars, Lucien felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 years. Not peace, not certainty, but purpose untainted by compromise. His father had tried working within systems designed to prevent justice. Lucien would try burning those systems down and building something better from the ashes, even if the fire consumed him in the process. Outside Ravenscar Keep, England mobilized forces against the Duke, who dared challenge crown authority. Inside, Lucien prepared for siege, and beside him stood a healer who'd somehow convinced him that dying for justice mattered more than surviving through compromise. Together they would face whatever England brought against them. Together they would fight corruption even if it meant destroying everything aristocratic society built. But first, Lucien had to survive one final realization that shattered what remained of his controlled world. Because revolutions don't just challenge external enemies. They expose internal betrayals no one saw coming. And in Ravenscar Keep's shadowed corridors, one betrayal waited that would force Lucien to choose between the justice he'd sworn to uphold and the vengeance screaming for release. A choice that would define whether he became the revolutionary hero fighting corruption or the tyrant proving every accusation correct. The answer waited in darkness. And darkness, as always, held secrets far more devastating than any enemy could inflict. 3 days after defying crown magistrates, Ravenscar Keep became an island fortress surrounded by gathering storms. Reports arrived hourly, royal forces mobilizing in southern territories, parliamentary declarations condemning Lucien's rebellion, noble houses withdrawing support, trade routes closing, financial sanctions threatening Blackthorne's economic foundation. England was preparing to crush the Duke, who dared challenge its corrupted authority. Lucien stood in the war room studying maps that showed encroaching threats from every direction. Red marks indicated military positions. Blue showed remaining loyal territories. The blue grew smaller with each update. Harrison entered with fresh intelligence. Your Grace, 3 more families have publicly denounced your actions. Lord Pemberton is calling for your arrest, and the Crown has issued formal warrant charging you with treason, unlawful detention, and insurrection. Lucien traced military positions without looking up. Expected. What about our defenses? The northern border is secure. Eastern approaches are fortified, but we're stretched thin. If they attack from multiple directions simultaneously, we can't hold. Then we don't hold. We strike first. Harrison's expression showed carefully controlled alarm. Strike against Crown forces? Your Grace, that's not rebellion. That's war. They made it war when they chose protecting murderers over prosecuting them. There's still time to negotiate, release the prisoners, accept Crown authority, beg royal mercy. Lucien finally looked at him. And when that mercy comes in the form of execution for treason? When Cedric and Grayson walk free while I hang for demanding justice? Is that the outcome you're suggesting? Harrison's silence was answer enough. No one believed negotiation would save Lucien now. He'd crossed too many lines, challenged too much authority, exposed too much corruption for the system to forgive. His only options were victory or death, and victory looked increasingly impossible. Seraphina entered carrying medical supplies and wearing an expression that suggested she'd been treating injuries again. More guards wounded during patrol skirmishes, 2 broken ribs, 1 dislocated shoulder. And Harrison, you're developing an ulcer from stress. I'm fine, Harrison protested. You're not. But you're also too stubborn to rest, so take this. She handed him a small vial, twice daily with food. After Harrison left, Seraphina moved to the maps. How bad is it, actually? Worse than I'm telling anyone. We have maybe a week before Crown forces arrive in overwhelming numbers. Less if parliamentary allies join the assault. Can we survive a week? Depends on whether additional betrayals emerge before then. You're expecting more? Lucien's jaw tightened. I'm expecting everything. Loyalty is expensive during rebellions. Most people can't afford it. That's remarkably cynical. That's remarkably realistic. People support revolution when it's theoretical. When soldiers arrive at their gates with execution warrants, support evaporates quickly. Seraphina studied him with that penetrating gaze he'd come to recognize. You're preparing for worst-case scenarios. Always. Which in your mind means what exactly? Lucien turned to face her fully. It means if Ravenscar Keep falls, you leave before that happens. Harrison has prepared escape routes and safe houses. You'll have funds, documentation, everything needed to disappear. I'm not leaving. This isn't negotiable. You're right, it's not. Because I'm staying regardless of your orders. Seraphina. No. We've had this argument. I'm not abandoning you to die heroically while I run away safely. That's not how this works. This isn't about heroism. It's about survival. Exactly. And I've survived plagues, battlefield hospitals, and aristocratic conspiracies. I think I can manage a siege. The determination in her voice was absolute. Lucien recognized it because he'd heard the same tone in his own voice when refusing to surrender prisoners to corrupted magistrates. They were both committed to paths that led nowhere good, but at least they'd walk those paths together. That night, Lucien visited Cedric in the dungeons. The former council member looked remarkably composed for someone facing execution. He sat on the stone bench like he was waiting for tea service instead of death. Your Grace, Cedric said pleasantly. Come to gloat? Come to understand. Understand what? Why someone would orchestrate years of conspiracy, murder a duke, poison his daughter, and risk everything for power they already partially possessed. Cedric smiled. You still think this was about power? It wasn't? Power was means, stability was goal. Your father's crusade against corruption would have destabilized trade networks, exposed intelligence operations, and weakened England against foreign threats. We removed him to protect the kingdom, by murdering him, by making difficult choices you're apparently incapable of making. Leadership requires getting hands dirty occasionally. Your father understood that intellectually, but couldn't act on it. You understand it emotionally, but pretend legal frameworks matter more than results. So you're saying murder is justified if outcomes are positive. I'm saying your moral absolutism is luxury England can't afford. The world doesn't operate on principles. It operates on power. And power requires sacrificing individual lives for collective stability. Lucien stepped closer to the cell bars. You poisoned my sister. Regrettable, but necessary. Her survival meant witness testimony. Witness testimony meant exposure. We couldn't risk it. She's 19 years old. She's Duke's daughter with political significance. Her age is irrelevant to strategic calculations. The casual dismissal of Eveline's humanity made something cold settle in Lucien's chest. He'd spent weeks building legal cases and gathering evidence specifically to avoid becoming the monster everyone feared. But listening to Cedric justify attempted murder of a teenage girl through strategic necessity made civilized restraint feel increasingly pointless. What separates you from men like Cedric isn't methods, it's purpose. The voice in his head sounded like Seraphina. He kills to protect power. You kill to protect people. That distinction matters even when the bodies pile up the same way. Did it, though? Dead was dead, regardless of philosophical justifications. You're going to hang, Lucien said quietly. Perhaps. But my death changes nothing. The networks I represented still exist. The corruption you want eliminated still functions. And England will crush your rebellion because stability always defeats righteousness when the two conflict. We'll see. Yes, we will. Lucien left the dungeons and climbed to Ravenscar Keep's highest tower, where he could see across Blackthorne's frozen territories. Lights flickered in distant villages. People living ordinary lives unaware their duke had declared war on the crown. How many of those people would die when royal forces arrived? How many villages would burn? How many families would be destroyed because Lucien refused to surrender prisoners to corrupted legal systems? The weight of it threatened to crush him. Seraphina found him there an hour later. She climbed the tower stairs and stood beside him without speaking. "I might be destroying more than I'm saving," Lucien said finally. "Possibly. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. You made a choice. Choices have consequences. Now you face them. And if the consequences include innocent deaths, then you'll carry that weight the rest of your life. Same as every leader who chooses principle over compromise." "Welcome to the impossible mathematics of power." Lucien looked at her. "How are you so calm about this?" "Because I've seen what happens when good people surrender to corrupt systems. They die slowly from the inside, become hollow versions of themselves. At least you're dying fighting for something real. I'm not dead yet." Seraphina smiled slightly. "No, not yet." They stood in silence, watching darkness consume the landscape. Somewhere beyond the horizon, crown forces prepared for assault. Parliamentary allies gathered strength. England mobilized to crush the rebellion before it could spread, and in Ravenscar Keep, two people who'd accidentally started a revolution prepared to face consequences neither had fully anticipated. The attack came at dawn, not from crown forces who were still days away, but from within. Lucien woke to alarm bells and shouting. He grabbed his sword and emerged from chambers to find corridors filled with smoke and chaos. Harrison appeared through the haze. "Your Grace, we're under attack, inside the fortress." "From who?" "Our own guards. They've turned." The betrayal hit like physical blow. Lucien had anticipated external assault, prepared for siege, fortified defenses against crown armies. He hadn't prepared for his own men switching sides. "How many?" he demanded. "Unknown. At least a dozen. They've seized the armory and are trying to reach the dungeons, to free Cedric or kill him. Either way eliminates your prosecution." Lucien moved through smoke-filled corridors with Harrison following. Around them, loyal guards fought against former allies in brutal close-quarters combat. The fortress had become war zone. They found Seraphina in the medical chambers treating wounded guards, while fighting continued outside. Blood covered her hands and clothes. Her expression showed clinical focus masking underlying fear. "How many injured?" Lucien asked. 7 so far. 3 critical. She worked without looking up. "This is bad, isn't it?" "Very. How did they get organized without anyone noticing?" "Money buys silence effectively. Someone paid substantial bribes to turn key guards at critical moments. Cedric's allies. Or parliamentary agents. Same result either way." An explosion rocked the eastern wing. Stone dust rained from ceilings. Somewhere below, men screamed. "They're breaching the dungeon level," Harrison said. Lucien grabbed his sword. "Get Seraphina to the secured chambers. Lock them down. No one enters until this is finished." "I'm not hiding while you fight," Seraphina protested. "You're also not dying because I failed to protect you. Move, now." The command in his voice allowed no argument. Seraphina let Harrison escort her toward the most fortified section of Ravenscar Keep while Lucien descended into chaos. The dungeon level had become slaughterhouse. Bodies of loyal guards lay scattered across stone floors, blood pooled in torchlight. And standing before Cedric's cell were 4 men in guard uniforms holding weapons still wet with fresh killing. "Step away from that cell," Lucien ordered. The men turned. Their leader smiled with mercenary confidence. "Can't do that, Your Grace. We have contracts to fulfill." "From who?" "Does it matter? You're outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and about to watch everything you fought for collapse." Lucien moved forward with predatory calm. 4 against 1. Poor odds for you. The mercenaries attacked simultaneously. What followed was violence stripped of aristocratic restraint. Lucien fought like a man with nothing left to lose. His blade found throats, hearts, stomachs. Bodies fell. Blood sprayed across stone walls. When it ended, all 4 mercenaries lay dead or dying. Lucien stood covered in blood and breathing hard. Inside the cell, Cedric watched with clinical interest. "Impressive," Cedric said, though ultimately futile. "More will come. You can't kill them all. Watch me." That's the response I expected. "Prove you're the monster we claimed. Validate every accusation Parliament made about you being too dangerous to rule." Lucien wiped blood from his face. "I'd rather be dangerous monster who fights corruption than civilized duke who protects it." "Noble sentiment. How's it working out?" "Ask me when this is over." More explosions shook the fortress. The attack was intensifying, multiple breach points, coordinated assault designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer chaos. This wasn't just paid guards turning traitor. This was full military operation, which meant Crown forces had arrived earlier than intelligence suggested. Lucien climbed from the dungeons and found Ravenscar Keep transforming into genuine battlefield. Royal soldiers poured through breached walls. Loyal guards fought desperately to hold key positions. Servants fled screaming through corridors. The siege had begun in earnest. Harrison found him in the Grand Hall. "Your Grace, we're losing the eastern wing. Northern defenses are holding but under heavy pressure. We need to fall back to Inner Keep." "How many soldiers?" "At least 200. Professional military. They're not here to arrest you. They're here to execute you. Then they'll have to work for it." Lucien organized retreat with brutal efficiency. Loyal guards fell back to predetermined positions. Barricades were erected. Choke points were fortified. Every advantage was exploited. But numbers told harsh truth. 200 trained soldiers against perhaps 40 loyal guards. The mathematics guaranteed only one outcome. Seraphina appeared from the secured chambers despite orders to remain hidden. She carried medical supplies and wore determination like armor. "I can help," she said. "You can survive," Lucien corrected. "That's help enough. People are dying. I'm a healer. Do the math. The math says you die alongside them if you stay exposed. Then I die doing what I'm trained for instead of hiding while others suffer." Before Lucien could argue further, explosions tore through the western wall. Royal soldiers flooded into the Grand Hall. Fighting erupted instantly. Lucien shoved Seraphina behind defensive positions and entered the fray. His sword became extension of focused rage. Every soldier who entered met steel. Every advance was countered with devastating precision. But for every soldier he killed, 3 more appeared. The fortress was falling. Loyal guards died protecting positions they couldn't hold. Servants were caught in crossfire. Blood turned marble floors slick. Smoke choked ancient corridors. This was what rebellion actually looked like. Not glorious revolution, not heroic stand against tyranny, just brutal slaughter of outmatched defenders fighting impossible odds. "Fall back," Lucien ordered. "Everyone to the throne chamber, now." The survivors retreated under covering fire. Perhaps 20 guards remained, countless wounded. Seraphina treating injuries faster than they accumulated. They barricaded themselves in the throne chamber where generations of Ravenscars had ruled. Heavy doors, thick walls, defensible position, also a tomb if reinforcements didn't arrive. "How long can we hold?" Lucien asked Harrison. "Hours, maybe. They'll breach eventually. Then we make those hours count." Outside the barricaded doors, royal forces gathered. Inside, defenders prepared for final stand. Seraphina worked among the wounded with tireless focus. Blood covered her completely now. Her hand shook from exhaustion, but never stopped moving. Lucien watched her save lives while his rebellion died around them. This was his fault, his choice. His refusal to surrender prisoners to corrupted systems had led directly to this massacre. Cedric had been right about one thing. Moral absolutism was luxury England couldn't afford. And Lucien had just proven it by getting loyal people killed defending principles courts would never recognize. Seraphina looked up and caught his expression. "Stop," she said. "Stop what?" "Blaming yourself. You gave people choice to stand with you or surrender. They chose. Honor that choice instead of drowning in guilt. They're dying for my pride. They're dying for justice. There's a difference, is there? Because from here it looks like pointless slaughter." Seraphina stood and crossed to him despite injured men requiring attention. "If you believe that, then Cedric wins. Everything he said about power mattering more than principle becomes true. Every cynic who claimed morality as weakness gets validated. So people should die to prove philosophical points? People should die fighting for worlds worth living in instead of surviving in systems that crush them. You gave them that option. Some took it. Don't dishonor their sacrifice by pretending it was meaningless." The words hit harder than any blade. Lucien had spent weeks questioning whether his choices served justice or just fed revenge disguised as righteousness. But Seraphina was right. The guards fighting beside him hadn't been forced into rebellion. They'd chosen it. Chosen principle over safety. Chosen standing against corruption even when surrender looked smarter. That choice mattered, even if they all died for it. Battering rams slammed against the throne chamber doors. Wood splintered, metal bent. Royal forces prepared final breach. Your Grace, Harrison said quietly, it's been an honor serving you. The honor was mine. Lucien positioned himself at the center of the chamber, sword ready, stance prepared. If this was his last stand, he'd make it memorable. The doors exploded inward. Royal soldiers poured through the breach, but instead of attacking immediately, they parted. Through the gap walked a man Lucien recognized from parliamentary portraits, Lord Chancellor Whitmore, the crown's highest legal authority. Duke Ravenscar, Whitmore said formally. By order of His Majesty, you are commanded to surrender immediately and submit to Crown justice. Lucien didn't lower his weapon. Define Crown justice. Trial in London for charges of treason, insurrection, and murder of royal soldiers. Murder in self-defense during unlawful assault on my territory. Semantics won't save you, neither will surrender. You'll execute me regardless of trial outcome. Whitmore's expression didn't change, possibly. But surrender gives your people chance to survive. Continued resistance guarantees everyone in this chamber dies. Lucien looked at the defenders around him. Exhausted guards, wounded servants. Seraphina standing among them covered in blood from treating injuries. They'd chosen this fight knowing the risks, but he couldn't force them to die for his principles. If I surrender, Lucien said carefully, everyone else walks free. No charges, no reprisals. The Crown will consider clemency for those who lay down arms immediately. Not clemency. Guaranteed freedom. You're not positioned to negotiate guarantees, then kill us all. Because I won't surrender without protecting the people who stood with me. Whitmore studied him. You realize you've lost? Your rebellion failed before it began. Cedric will be released. Parliamentary corruption continues. And you'll die having accomplished nothing except validating every fear about unchecked ducal power. Maybe. Or maybe I've shown England that some people still believe justice matters more than survival. Noble sentiment from a man about to hang. Better than living on my knees. The standoff stretched. Soldiers waited for orders. Defenders gripped weapons with trembling hands. The entire chamber held collective breath. Then Evelyn's voice cut through tension. Brother, she called from behind defensive positions. Stop! Lucien turned. His sister stood supported by servants, still weak from poisoning but conscious and determined. Evelyn, get back! No. Listen to me. You've fought for justice. You've exposed corruption. You've proven our father's death wasn't meaningless accident. That's enough. It's not enough. Cedric and Grayson need to face. They will. Just not the way you planned. What are you talking about? Evelyn moved forward slowly. I sent letters, before the siege, to every noble house in England. Detailed everything. Cedric's confession, Grayson's attack, the conspiracy. All of it documented and distributed. Lucien's breath stopped. You what? I couldn't let you die alone carrying this burden, so I made sure even if we fall, the truth survives. Every house knows what happened. Parliament can't suppress it now. Behind Whitmore, soldiers shifted uncomfortably. The Chancellor's expression darkened. Is this true? Whitmore demanded. Evelyn met his gaze without flinching. Every word, verified testimonies, physical evidence, witness statements. It's already spreading across England. You can execute my brother, but you can't kill the truth he died exposing. The political calculation shifted visibly across Whitmore's face. Executing Lucien after that revelation would create martyr. Validating his accusations would destroy parliamentary credibility. The Crown was trapped. Whitmore turned back to Lucien. It seems we have a complication. Seems that way. The Chancellor considered for a long moment. Then he made a decision that shocked everyone present. Stand down, he ordered his soldiers. All forces withdraw immediately. My lord, one captain protested. You heard me. Withdraw. As soldiers retreated in confusion, Whitmore approached Lucien directly. This isn't mercy, the Chancellor said quietly. This is pragmatism. Executing you now creates bigger problems than your continued existence. But understand this clearly. You're being watched. One more rebellion, one more challenge to Crown authority, and no amount of distributed evidence will save you. Understood. And the prisoners? Remain in your custody pending proper trial. With Crown oversight to ensure legal procedures are followed, it wasn't victory, but it wasn't death either. It was something messier, more complicated, more real than either outcome. Compromise born from mutual recognition that total victory carried costs neither side could afford. After Whitmore departed with royal forces, silence crashed through the throne chamber. Defenders stared at each other, uncertain whether they'd won or just delayed inevitable execution. Lucien found Seraphina among the wounded. She looked up with exhaustion written across every feature. "Did we just survive that?" she asked. "Apparently. Feels anticlimactic. Most real endings do." They stood surrounded by evidence of brutal fighting: blood, bodies, shattered defenses. The physical cost of choosing principle over pragmatism. But they'd survived. More importantly, the truth had survived. Eveline's distributed letters meant England knew what happened. Parliamentary corruption was exposed. Cedric's conspiracy was documented. Even if courts eventually failed, history wouldn't. That night, after wounded were treated and bodies were cleared, Lucien stood in his private chambers staring at devastation visible through broken windows. Seraphina entered without knocking. "You should rest." "Can't. Too much to process, then process out loud." "I'm listening." Lucien turned to face her. "I almost got everyone killed." "For what?" "Cedric still breathes. Parliament still functions. Crown authority remains intact." "What did we actually accomplish?" "You exposed truth powerful people wanted buried. You gave defenders choice to fight for something real. And you proved that one person refusing to accept corruption can force entire systems to acknowledge their failures." "At what cost?" "At the cost that matters. You didn't become the monster they claimed. Despite every reason, despite every pressure, you fought without losing yourself." "I came close." Seraphina moved to him. "Close doesn't count. You held the line when it mattered most. That's victory even if it doesn't feel like one." Lucien studied her. "Why do you believe in me so completely?" "Because I've seen what you are when stripped of all pretense. And that person is worth believing in, even after everything?" "Especially after everything." She stood on tiptoes and kissed him. Soft at first, then deeper as exhaustion and relief and something far more dangerous flooded through them both. When they finally separated, Seraphina smiled. "So, what happens now?" "Now," Lucien said, "we finish what we started, properly, legally, with crown oversight and aristocratic scrutiny. We give England the trial it deserves. And after the trial, we figure out whether a duke and a common-born healer can actually build something together. Or if rebellion was the only thing we had in common. Only one way to find out." "Yes, only one way." Outside Ravenscar Keep, England watched and waited. Inside, two people who'd accidentally started a revolution prepared for its next phase. The trial would begin in 3 weeks. Cedric would face justice. Truth would confront power. And whatever emerged from that confrontation would define whether Lucien's rebellion had been feudal gesture or the first crack in systems centuries old. But tonight, in chambers damaged by siege and stained with blood of defenders, Lucien allowed himself something he hadn't permitted in years. Hope. Dangerous. Fragile. Completely unjustified by evidence. But real nonetheless. Because sometimes fighting impossible battles matters more than winning them. Sometimes exposing truth matters more than securing conviction. And sometimes surviving together matters more than conquering alone. The war wasn't over. But for the first time, Lucien believed it might be winnable. And standing beside him was the healer who'd somehow convinced him that becoming better than his enemies mattered more than simply defeating them. Together they'd face whatever England brought. Together they'd build justice from rebellion's ashes. Together they'd prove that love forged in conflict could survive peace. If peace ever came, if justice ever prevailed, if hope ever proved stronger than the darkness consuming England's corrupted heart. 3 weeks until trial. 3 weeks until truth faced its reckoning. 3 weeks until Lucien discovered whether his father's sacrifice had meant something or just inspired his son's equally meaningless death. The answer waited in London's courts. And courts, as always, favored power over principle. But Lucien Ravenscar had stopped caring about favorable odds the moment he chose justice over survival. Now he'd see that choice through to whatever end waited, even if that end was execution, even if that end was failure, even if that end proved Cedric right about power mattering more than righteousness. At least he'd die knowing he fought. And fighting, sometimes, was victory enough. 3 weeks passed like watching stone erode under relentless water. Ravenscar Keep rebuilt itself slowly. Walls were repaired. Bodies were buried. Blood was scrubbed from marble floors until only faint stains remained, permanent reminders of the price rebellion demanded. Lucien spent those weeks preparing for trial with methodical precision. Every piece of evidence was organized. Every witness was interviewed. Every legal argument was constructed and reconstructed until the case became fortress of its own. But preparation couldn't eliminate uncertainty. London courts operated under rules designed to protect aristocratic power. Parliamentary influence ran deep, and Cedric's allies still controlled mechanisms that could transform overwhelming evidence into legal technicality. The trial could fail spectacularly, despite everything Lucien had sacrificed. On the final night before departure to London, Lucien found Seraphina in the medical chambers organizing supplies. She worked with focused intensity that suggested she was avoiding something. "You're not coming to London," Lucien said. It wasn't a question. Seraphina didn't look up. "Someone needs to manage Eveline's continued recovery. Harrison can manage that. This is avoidance." "Yes, it is." "Why?" She finally met his eyes. "Because watching you walk into that courtroom knowing they might execute you regardless of evidence is more than I can handle. I've treated dying patients. I've held people while they bled out. I've faced every horror medicine encounters. But watching you face aristocratic justice terrifies me in ways nothing else has." The raw honesty hit harder than any accusation. Lucien crossed to her and took her hands, both still stained with traces of blood that never fully washed away. "I need you there. You need legal experts and parliamentary allies, not a healer who can't help if everything collapses. You're wrong. I need the person who convinced me justice mattered more than revenge, who challenged every assumption I made about power, who made me believe becoming better than my enemies was possible." Seraphina's eyes glistened. "And if you die anyway?" "Then I die knowing someone believed I was worth more than the monster everyone feared. That's not comforting. It's not meant to be. It's just true." She pulled away and stared at medical instruments arranged with obsessive precision. "When I first came to Ravenscar Keep, I thought I was just saving a dying girl. I didn't anticipate conspiracies, rebellions, or falling for a duke who fights corruption like personal crusade. Neither did I. The falling part." Seraphina smiled slightly. "We're terrible at self-preservation. Absolutely terrible." She turned back to him. "If I come to London and watch them convict you despite everything, I will burn that courthouse down. You understand that? I'm counting on it." The journey to London took 4 days through territories that watched with mixture of fear and fascination. Word of Lucien's rebellion had spread across England. Some called him hero. Others called him traitor. Most simply watched to see whether one duke could actually challenge systems centuries old. They arrived in London to find the city divided. Supporters gathered outside courthouses demanding justice. Parliamentary loyalists organized counter-demonstrations defending crown authority. Military presence was everywhere, prepared for riots regardless of verdict. The trial had become national spectacle. England itself was on trial alongside Cedric Hollowmere and Minister Grayson. Every corrupted system, every aristocratic protection, every compromise that valued stability over righteousness. The courtroom was a massive chamber designed to intimidate. High ceilings, elaborate decorations, judges positioned above everyone else like secular deities dispensing justice from Olympian heights. 3 judges presided, all appointed by Parliament, all connected to the same networks Lucien was trying to expose. The odds were stacked before a single word was spoken. Cedric entered in chains but wearing expensive clothing that maintained aristocratic dignity. He smiled at Lucien with confidence, suggesting he'd already secured favorable verdict through backroom negotiations. Grayson looked less certain. His nervous energy had returned. He shuffled papers and avoided eye contact with everyone. The prosecution was led by Crown attorneys obligated to present the case but not necessarily committed to conviction. Their opening statements were technically accurate but emotionally hollow, reciting facts without fury, documenting crimes without demanding consequences. It was performance designed to satisfy legal requirements while achieving nothing. Lucien sat through it with controlled rage. This was what his father had faced: systems that processed justice through mechanisms designed to prevent it, courts that followed procedures while ignoring truth. Then Evelyn testified. She walked to the witness stand with quiet dignity that silenced the courtroom. Her youth made her vulnerability obvious. Her composure made her credibility undeniable. The lead judge, Lord Justice Pemberton, leaned forward. Lady Evelyn, please describe what happened at the dinner party 3 months ago. Evelyn's voice was steady. Lord Hollowmere proposed a toast to family loyalty. Everyone drank. Minutes later, I felt strange. My fingers went numb. I collapsed. The last thing I remember clearly was Lord Hollowmere smiling while I fell. You're certain he was smiling? Yes. It wasn't concern or shock. It was satisfaction. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Cedric's attorney objected immediately. Speculation about emotional states isn't evidence. Pemberton nodded. Sustained. Lady Evelyn, please limit testimony to observable facts. That is observable fact, Evelyn replied. I observed his expression. I observed his lack of assistance while servants panicked. I observed everything that proved he wanted me dead. The attorney objected again. Your Honor, the witness is clearly biased against my client. Her client tried to murder her, Seraphina called from the gallery. Bias seems reasonable under circumstances. Pemberton's gavel crashed down. Order. Miss Vale. Another outburst results in removal. Seraphina settled back, but her expression promised future disruptions. The testimony continued for hours. Medical experts explained the poisoning. Servants described suspicious meetings between Cedric and unknown visitors. Financial records showed unexplained payments. But the most devastating evidence came from an unexpected source. Harrison took the stand wearing formal attire that made him look like an aristocrat himself. He'd served the Ravenscar family for 30 years. His credibility was unimpeachable. Master Harrison, the prosecutor said, did you witness anything unusual regarding Lord Hollowmere's behavior before Duke Marcus Ravenscar's death? Harrison's voice carried across the silent courtroom. Yes. Lord Hollowmere met privately with Duke Marcus 2 days before the hunting trip. I overheard them arguing about the corruption investigation. Lord Hollowmere urged the Duke to abandon it, said it endangered too many important people. What was Duke Marcus's response? He told Lord Hollowmere that important people who commit crimes should face consequences like anyone else, that England's stability depended on justice, not protecting powerful criminals. And Lord Hollowmere's reaction? Harrison paused. He said some stones are better left unturned, that Duke Marcus's idealism would get him killed. The courtroom erupted. Judges demanded order. Cedric's attorney shouted objections. Parliamentary observers whispered frantically. Because Harrison had just testified that Cedric essentially predicted Marcus Ravenscar's murder 2 days before it happened. The defense spent hours attacking Harrison's credibility, suggesting age had affected memory, implying loyalty to Lucien biased his testimony, claiming private conversation couldn't be verified, but Harrison never wavered. Every question was answered with calm precision. Every attack was deflected with dignified certainty. By the time he stepped down, the prosecution had built a case that was architecturally sound even if politically inconvenient. Then Grayson broke. The minister had sat through testimony growing increasingly agitated. When called to testify in his own defense, he took the stand visibly trembling. Minister Grayson, his attorney began, please explain your relationship with Duke Ravenscar's investigation. Grayson stared at the packed courtroom, at nobles who'd shared his conspiracy, at parliament members who'd benefited from the corruption he helped protect, at systems designed to shield men like him from consequences, and he decided truth mattered more than survival. I helped kill Duke Marcus Ravenscar, Grayson said clearly. The courtroom exploded into chaos. His attorney lunged forward, trying to stop him. Judges pounded gavels, demanding order. Parliamentary observers scrambled for exits. Cedric's face transformed from confident to horrified. But Grayson kept talking. We planned it for months. Cedric organized everything. Lord Ashford provided the crossbow. I arranged the hunting party to ensure Duke Marcus was vulnerable. We killed him because his investigation threatened networks we'd spent decades building. The lead judge finally restored order. Minister Grayson, you understand you're confessing to murder and conspiracy? Yes. And I'm confessing to poisoning Lady Evelyn, to attacking Miss Vale, to coordinating with parliamentary allies to protect Cedric when the investigation began. All of it. Every crime Lucien Ravenscar accused us of is true. Why? Why confess now? Grayson looked directly at Lucien, because watching him fight for justice while we hid behind legal technicalities made me realize we'd become exactly what we claimed to oppose, monsters wrapped in authority. We told ourselves we were protecting England, but we were just protecting power. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the judges seemed uncertain how to proceed. A full confession from a sitting minister destroyed any pretense of defense, made conviction inevitable, exposed parliamentary complicity in ways that couldn't be ignored. Grayson's attorney requested recess. The judges granted it. Everyone filed out in stunned silence. In the corridor outside, Lucien found himself surrounded by supporters and opponents alike. Everyone wanted reaction, statement, indication of what confession meant. He provided none. Instead, he found Seraphina in the chaos. She grabbed his hands without speaking. They stood while legal and political systems collapsed around them. "Did that just happen?" she asked finally. "Yes. We won. Maybe. Or maybe Grayson just guaranteed we all get destroyed together. How could confession destroy you? Because it exposes corruption reaching into Parliament itself. That makes powerful people very nervous. Nervous people do desperate things." She studied his face. "You're not celebrating. I'm waiting to see what they sacrifice to protect themselves." The answer came 3 hours later when court reconvened. Lord Justice Pemberton looked like a man who'd aged years during recess. His announcement was delivered with bureaucratic detachment that barely concealed political terror. "This court finds Lord Cedric Hollowmere guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of Lady Evelyn Ravenscar, and treason against the Duchy of Blackthorne. Sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out within 1 week." Applause erupted from supporters. Cedric sat motionless, his aristocratic composure finally shattered. "Minister Grayson," Pemberton continued, "is found guilty of the same charges. However, given his cooperation and full confession, sentence is reduced to life imprisonment." The courtroom murmured. Reduced sentence rewarded the confession while still punishing the crimes. Political compromise that satisfied no one completely, but prevented total institutional collapse. Pemberton wasn't finished. Regarding accusations of broader parliamentary corruption, this court recommends Crown investigation into all individuals named in testimony. Until such investigation concludes, those individuals are suspended from governmental duties pending review. Translation: the conspiracy was real, Parliament was complicit, and England's government was about to undergo forced reformation, whether it wanted to or not. Lucien had won. Not the clean victory of fantasy where villains were destroyed and systems reformed instantly, but the messy, complicated, frustratingly incomplete victory of reality where corruption was exposed, consequences were enforced, and reformation became possible even if not guaranteed. His father's death had been avenged. Evelyn's poisoning had been prosecuted. And England had been forced to acknowledge that justice mattered even when inconvenient. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Outside the courthouse, crowds celebrated and protested in equal measure. Supporters cheered Lucien as hero. Critics condemned him as threat to stability. Most simply processed the reality that one duke had challenged centuries of aristocratic immunity and survived. Seraphina found him in the chaos and kissed him in full view of everyone. Aristocratic propriety be damned. When they finally separated, she smiled. "So, what now?" "Now," Lucien said, "we go home. Rebuild Blackthorne. Figure out whether peace is actually achievable or just theoretical concept. And us? We figure that out too." They returned to Ravenscar Keep 1 week after Cedric's execution. The fortress felt different, lighter somehow. As though exorcising conspiracy had lifted weight that had pressed down for years. Evelyn had fully recovered. She moved through corridors with renewed energy, already planning to transform the East Wing into the medical academy Seraphina had envisioned. Harrison managed household affairs with quiet efficiency, though he moved slower now. The siege had aged him visibly, but his dignity remained intact, and Lucien discovered something unexpected. Governing without conspiracy felt remarkably simple. Without enemies to fight, aristocratic warfare to navigate, or corruption to expose, leadership became what it should have been all along. Serving people, administering justice, building systems that valued humanity over hierarchy. It was boring compared to rebellion, and absolutely necessary. 3 months after the trial, Lucien stood in the grand hall where portraits of dead Ravenscars still watched. His father's painting seemed different now, less accusatory, more approving. "You finished it," Lucien said quietly to the portrait. "The investigation, the exposure, the justice you died pursuing. It took 5 years and cost more than it should have, but it's done. Seraphina appeared beside him. Talking to paintings now? He was talking first. I'm just responding. That's concerning for multiple reasons. Lucien smiled. Probably. They stood in comfortable silence until Seraphina spoke again. I've been thinking about what you said, about figuring out if a duke and a healer can build something together. And I think we already have. We built justice from rebellion, truth from conspiracy, trust from suspicion. The question isn't whether we can build something. It's whether we're brave enough to maintain it. Meaning fighting together was easy compared to living together. Rebellion has clear enemies and obvious goals. Peace requires navigating complications that warfare simplifies away. You're saying maintaining peace is harder than winning wars? I'm saying yes. Absolutely. Without question. Lucien considered this. Then I suppose we need to be as committed to peace as we were to justice. Can you do that? Stop being the terrifying duke everyone fears and become the stable leader everyone needs? I can try, if you help. Always demanding things, Seraphina said. It's very aristocratic of you. You could say no. I could, but then who would stop you from reverting to violent monster the moment something goes wrong? Good point. I'm filled with good points. It's exhausting. He pulled her close. Stay anyway. Fine. But I'm keeping my medical practice. Treating common people. Operating outside aristocratic expectations. Not becoming decorative duchess who hosts tea parties. I wouldn't dream of asking you to be decorative. Good. Because I'm terrible at it. I noticed. They kissed in the grand hall where generations of Ravenscars had schemed, plotted, and died defending power. But Lucien and Seraphina were building something different. Not power for its own sake, but authority used to serve rather than dominate. It was revolutionary in its simplicity, and terrifying in its vulnerability, because peace required trust. Trust created leverage, and leverage could be exploited by future enemies who learned from Cedric's failures. But for now, in this moment, vulnerability felt like strength instead of weakness. The wedding happened 6 months later. Small ceremony. No elaborate aristocratic theatrics. Just vows exchanged in Ravenscar Keep's chapel, with Eveline officiating and Harrison crying quietly in the front row. Parliamentary observers attended looking vaguely horrified that a duke was marrying common-born healer. Society pages wrote scandalized articles. Traditional families denounced the union as degradation of noble bloodlines. Lucien and Seraphina ignored all of it. They'd fought too hard for freedom to surrender it to aristocratic expectations now. The reception was held in the grand hall where portraits watched with painted indifference. Nobles mingled with common villagers. Physicians drank beside soldiers. The rigid hierarchies England worshipped blurred into something resembling actual community. It was uncomfortable for everyone, which meant it was exactly right. Late in the evening, Lucien found himself on the tower where he'd stood before trial, staring across Blackthorne's territories. But this time he wasn't alone. Seraphina joined him wearing wedding dress that managed to be both elegant and practical. Very on brand for her. Regretting this yet? She asked. Which part? Marrying you or reforming England? Both. Neither. Liar. You're already calculating what disasters might emerge. Always. It's pathological at this point. She leaned against him. Can I tell you something? Always. I'm terrified we've just made ourselves targets. That peaceful life we're building creates vulnerability. That loving someone gives enemies leverage we can't defend against. Lucien pulled her closer. I have that exact fear constantly. So how do we survive it? Same way we survived everything else. Together. Watching each other's blind spots. Trusting that partnership is stronger than isolation. That's remarkably optimistic for a man who trusted no one 6 months ago. You changed me. Good. You needed changing. Probably. They stood watching darkness consume the landscape while celebration continued below. Music drifted up from the grand hall. Laughter echoed through ancient corridors. Life persisted despite conspiracies, rebellions, and all the violence humans inflicted on each other. That persistence mattered, not because it was easy, but because it was real. Seraphina spoke quietly. Tell me again why you chose this. Justice over revenge. Trial over execution. All of it. Lucien considered the question seriously. Because my father believed systems could be better than the people running them. That England could value principle over power. And because you convinced me that becoming better than my enemies mattered more than simply defeating them. Do you still believe that? Yes. Even knowing how hard maintaining it will be. Even knowing future threats will emerge. Even knowing peace is more fragile than war. Why? Because the alternative is becoming what we fought against. And that's unacceptable. Even if it costs everything, especially then. The answer satisfied something deep in both of them. The understanding that they'd chosen path requiring constant vigilance. That peace wasn't permanent state, but ongoing choice. That every day would demand recommitment to principles easier to abandon. But they'd make that choice, again and again, for as long as it mattered. Years passed. Ravenscar Keep transformed under their governance. The medical academy Eveline championed became England's premier healing institution, training physicians from every social class. Aristocratic hierarchies softened as competence mattered more than bloodlines, and Blackthorne flourished under leadership that valued people over power. Lucien remained Duke, still feared by criminals, still respected by allies, still dangerous when necessary. But the darkness that had consumed him after his father's death had transformed into something else. Not light, exactly, but purposeful shadow, strength tempered by wisdom, power constrained by principle. He became what his father had envisioned, leader who governed through justice rather than domination, duke who served rather than ruled, man who understood that true strength was choosing restraint when violence felt easier. And beside him was Seraphina, not as decorative duchess, but as partner who challenged him constantly, who ran the medical academy with ruthless efficiency, who treated dying villagers and powerful nobles with equal competence, who refused to let him backslide into comfortable tyranny whenever problems emerged. She kept him human, which was harder than keeping him powerful. They had children eventually. 3. All taught that nobility was earned through service rather than inherited through blood. All expected to contribute to something larger than aristocratic privilege. All raised to question authority, even when that authority was their parents. It was exhausting. It was perfect. On Lucien's 50th birthday, he stood in the grand hall where his father's portrait still occupied place of honor. Gray had entered his hair, lines marked his face, the physical evidence of years spent building instead of destroying. Seraphina found him there, also aged, also marked by time, also somehow more beautiful for the evidence of life fully lived. "Thinking about your father?" she asked. "Always. What would he think of what you've built?" Lucien studied the painted face. "I think he'd be proud, and probably shocked I didn't get executed for rebellion. Fair assessment." They stood in comfortable silence until Eveline arrived with grandchildren in tow. Harrison followed, moving slower now but still managing household affairs with quiet dignity. The family gathered for celebration that mixed aristocratic tradition with common joy. Music played, food was shared, stories were told. And in quiet moments, Lucien reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From broken duke consumed by grief to revolutionary fighting corruption to leader building something worth preserving. From trusting no one to building family on foundation of hard-won trust. From believing power was only shield against betrayal to understanding that love was stronger protection. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But standing in Ravenscar Keep surrounded by family built on choice, rather than obligation, Lucien recognized something profound. Victory wasn't single moment. It was accumulation of choices made across decades. Choosing justice over revenge. Principle over expedience, love over isolation, again and again until those choices became identity. His father had started that journey. Lucien had continued it, and his children would carry it forward into futures he couldn't predict. That was legacy, not power preserved but values transmitted, not wealth protected but principles embodied, not aristocratic bloodlines maintained but human dignity honored. That night, after celebrations ended and households slept, Lucien found himself once more on the tower overlooking Blackthorne. Seraphina joined him, wrapped in practical cloak against autumn cold. "Still calculating disasters?" she asked. "Always. But also calculating victories. That's new. You're a good influence. Finally. Took you long enough to notice." Lucien pulled her close. "I notice everything about you. Have since the moment you walked into Ravenscar Keep refusing to bow properly. You were terrifying. You were fearless. I was pretending. Internally, I was screaming. You hit it well. Years of practice. Healing requires confidence, even when uncertain. They stood watching stars emerge above territories they'd fought to transform. Below them, Blackthorne slept peacefully. No conspiracies, no rebellions. Just ordinary people living ordinary lives protected by systems that valued them. It was everything Lucien's father had died trying to achieve, and everything Lucien had nearly destroyed pursuing revenge. The balance between those extremes defined his entire life, honoring his father's vision while avoiding his father's fate, seeking justice without becoming tyrant, building future while learning from past. Seraphina spoke quietly. Do you think we made the right choices? Yes. No hesitation? None. We made the only choices worth making. Whether they were right or wrong matters less than whether they were honest. That's remarkably philosophical. You're corrupting me with wisdom. Good. You needed corrupting. Still? Always. They kissed with familiarity built across decades. Not passionate urgency of youth, but deeper certainty of partnership tested by every challenge marriage could offer. When they separated, Seraphina smiled. I love you, Lucien Ravenscar, even when you're calculating disasters, even when you're terrifying everyone around you, even when you're impossible. I love you, Seraphina Ravenscar, even when you're challenging every decision I make, even when you're refusing aristocratic expectations, even when you're making me better than I want to be. That's the best kind of love, the only kind that lasts. They returned to chambers where portraits of dead Ravenscars no longer watched with judgment, but with something approaching approval, where weight of legacy felt like gift instead of burden, where peace wasn't weakness but achievement. And in that moment, Lucien understood something fundamental. Power without purpose creates tyranny. Justice without mercy creates cruelty. And love without freedom becomes prison. But purpose guided by principle, justice tempered by compassion, and love built on choice creates something worth dying for, worth living for, worth building across generations until systems transform and England becomes what it should have been all along. A place where common-born healers could challenge dukes, where corruption faced consequences regardless of bloodlines, where humanity mattered more than hierarchy. His father had dreamed it. Lucien had fought for it, and together with Seraphina he'd built it, not perfectly, never perfectly, but real, enduring, true, and that was a victory enough. The story of Duke Lucien Ravenscar and Seraphina Vale became legend across England, told in villages and aristocratic parlors alike, embellished by storytellers, debated by scholars, analyzed by those seeking to understand how one man's refusal to accept corruption sparked reformation. But the truth was simpler than legend. Two people chose principle over convenience, justice over revenge, love over isolation, and refused to surrender those choices even when surrender looked smarter. That was all. That was everything. And long after they died, long after Ravenscar Keep passed to children and grandchildren and generations beyond, the lesson remained. That true strength isn't domination. It's choosing to be better when being worse feels easier. That real victory isn't defeating enemies. It's building something worth defending. And that love isn't possession. It's partnership brave enough to face whatever darkness threatens. These truths endure, not because they're comfortable, but because they're real. And reality, however harsh, always matters more than convenient fiction. This is the story of Duke Lucien Ravenscar, who became monster to fight monsters, then became man to build peace, and finally became legend by proving that redemption is possible even for those consumed by darkness. If they're willing to fight for it, if they're brave enough to change, if they find someone who refuses to let them surrender to the worst versions of themselves. That someone, for Lucien, was Seraphina, and together they proved that even broken people can build beautiful things if they're willing to try, if they never stop choosing better, if they remember that the hardest battles are fought not against external enemies, but against the darkness within. That's the real story, the one worth telling, the one worth remembering. Long after England forgets aristocratic scandals and parliamentary corruption, this truth will remain. Love transforms. Justice endures. And sometimes, just sometimes, choosing righteousness over expedience actually matters, even when it costs everything, especially then. This story is entirely fictional and created for entertainment and storytelling purposes only.